29 years ago, a convoy transporting 20 mining workers completely vanished during a nighttime journey in Montana, disappearing without a trace, leaving their families devastated and a community plunged into unexplained terror. Authorities once suspected the convoy's supervisor, who also vanished with them, might have been involved, but no bodies were found. There was no physical evidence and too few clues to follow, causing the investigation to quickly stall. However, many relatives never gave up hope, clinging to the slim belief that someone from the group might still be alive out there somewhere. Then in 2015, while reviewing a wildfire-burned area, a firefighting crew discovered a strange detail that all previous searches had overlooked, a detail powerful enough to turn the entire case upside down and shock those involved in a way no one could have ever imagined. Before diving deeper into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you like this video, don't forget to hit subscribe. In November 1997, Montana entered the early stages of winter with cold winds sweeping across the plains and increasingly thick snow covering the slopes of the Highwood Mountains. This was the time when industrial transport routes faced the harshest conditions of the year, but the schedule for hauling manganese ore from the mine near Townsend to the processing facility in Great Falls still had to be maintained on time. On the afternoon of November 12, 3 trucks from Montana Minerals Transport were dispatched for the last haul of the week, with a total of 20 personnel including drivers, technicians, and accompanying workers. The person in charge of supervision was Calvin Raleigh, a supervisor with over 10 years of experience in the company's transport system. According to the operational plan, the convoy left the Townsend mine at 1740, following the standard route north via Highway 89, passing through the geyser area, and then continuing toward Great Falls in an estimated travel time of 3.5 hours. Worsening weather conditions beyond the forecast prompted the dispatch unit to closely monitor the convoy's progress via CB radio communication. At 1855, the Geyser gas station recorded the convoy stopping for fuel as scheduled. This was the last confirmed data on their location. After 2014, all communication with the convoy was completely lost, with no response signals from any of the vehicles. The dispatch department initially assumed the communication network was affected by the intensifying snowstorm, but when the convoy had not arrived at the Great Falls rendezvous point by 2145, the on-duty staff began rechecking the system and repeatedly calling the transport group's radio channel without success. By 2010, the company initiated an internal emergency verification procedure because the convoy's location could not be determined. Some victims' families began calling the company around 0045 after receiving no information from their loved ones. After completing the verification of personnel, vehicles, and cargo, the on-duty department shifted focus to identifying the last point of contact with the convoy to narrow down the time frame of the incident. According to data provided by Montana Minerals Transport, the last radio CB contact was recorded at 20,014, after which all signals from the 3 trucks were cut simultaneously. This timestamp was immediately forwarded to the dispatch department to mark the suspected area based on the planned route and the convoy's average speed after leaving the geyser station. On that basis, when the Judith Basin Sheriff officially took over the case as a mass disappearance, the investigation team's top priority was to reconstruct an accurate travel timeline from the departure time until the radio signal ceased. In order to determine the spatial temporal range where the incident likely occurred, investigators began by collecting all operational logs from the Townsend mine, including shift handover records, personnel assignment lists, the time the convoy left the mine gate as recorded by security, and manual records of the ore quantities loaded onto each truck. According to this data, the convoy was confirmed to have left the mine area at 1740, in conditions where strong winds and light snow were present, but not severe enough to obstruct visibility or require route change. After verifying the departure time, investigators moved on to gathering all transaction information from the Geyser gas station where the convoy was reported to have stopped for fuel. The station employee provided electronic receipts printed at 1855, clearly recording the 3 trucks refueling sequentially according to long-haul quotas. Security camera footage, though not sharp, was sufficient to confirm the 3 trucks departed the station around 19,008. Reconstructing the route from Townsend to Geyser allowed assessment of the convoy's average speed amid deteriorating weather. By cross-referencing traffic maps and NOAA weather reports, the investigation team determined that between 1830 and 1930, the Highwood Mountains area began experiencing strong gusts accompanied by rapidly increasing snowfall density, potentially extending travel time on uphill sections by 10 to 15 minutes. When comparing the distance from the Townsend mine to the geyser stop with an average speed of 45 to 50 miles per hour under normal conditions, investigators found that this time step aligned with the gas station payment data, indicating no signs of delay or deviation in the initial leg. Based on that, the investigation team proceeded to estimate the journey from geyser to the loss of contact time at 20,001 Ford. Weather data showed that starting around 1940, the Geyser-Highwood area began experiencing localized whiteout conditions, severely reducing visibility and forcing vehicles to slow down. When correlating this factor with a complete radio signal cutoff, investigators determined the convoy was most likely traveling in the transitional area between flat road sections and the uphill stretch leading into the mountains. Thus, the final timeline was established: 1740 departure from the mine, 1855 arrival at geyser, 1955 arrival at geyser, 1940 entering the area directly affected by the snowstorm, and 2014 as the time all radio communication ceased. This timeline was deemed the most consistent with actual data and became the foundation for the next analytical step. Based on the established timeframe, Judith Basin Sheriff investigators began focusing on thoroughly scanning the entire planned route the convoy was supposed to take on the night of November 12, 1997, to assess whether the convoy might have deviated from the standard route during that period. The first step was to create a map of the standard route used for transports from the Townsend mine to the receiving point in Great Falls, including sections of Highway 12, Highway 89, and routes approved by local transportation authorities for heavy trucks in winter. Key traffic markers, intersections, speed limit zones, and sections adjacent to the Highwood foothills were marked in detail, forming the core reference map for the entire subsequent scanning phase. Next, the investigation team checked the traffic alert system and road closure notices stored in Montana Department of Transportation data for November 1997. Some minor passes east of Highwood were reported unsafe for heavy vehicles due to ice buildup and strong winds, particularly the section near Highwood Bench Road. However, the standard route the convoy was required to use was not on the list of closures or restricted warnings on the day of the incident. This ruled out the possibility that the convoy was forced to change routes due to traffic regulations. After clarifying official factors from transportation authorities, investigators began evaluating the possibility that the convoy chose an alternate route, specifically one that Supervisor Calvin Raleigh might have considered to shorten time. This alternate route, according to company-provided data, was a secondary path that could save 15 to 20 minutes under favorable weather, looping through the Highwood Bench area and cutting straight down to Belt before rejoining the standard route. To assess feasibility, investigators analyzed slope gradients, road surface conditions, and risks of using a secondary route during a snowstorm. From topographic maps, the investigation team noted that the route Raleigh was suspected of intending to take included many steep slopes and areas prone to loss of control if iced over. However, since the convoy was confirmed to have stopped at the Geyser gas station, a location aligned with the standard route, investigators could not yet conclude that the group had turned onto the secondary route or changed course after leaving the station. To strengthen the assessment, the investigation team also cross-referenced estimated travel speeds based on weather conditions and the 2014 loss of contact time. Calculations showed that if the convoy continued on the standard route, their position at the time of loss of contact was most likely in the transitional section between Geyser and the base of Highwood, coinciding with the area directly affected by the snowstorm. Conversely, using the alternate route would significantly extend travel time due to poor road conditions and limited visibility, inconsistent with the recorded final contact timestamp. Although there were indications that Raleigh had considered different routes on previous trips, company records showed no instructions to change routes on the day of the incident, and data from the Geyser gas station also did not indicate the convoy turned in a different direction immediately after leaving. From this, investigators concluded that at this point there was no basis to determine the convoy had left the standard route. The standard route remained the most plausible option for initial search zoning. Based on this conclusion, the Judith Basin Sheriff moved to the next phase of the response protocol, mobilizing SAR forces to conduct ground searches along the Townsend-Doak corridor, the area deemed to have the highest probability matching the convoy's position at the time of loss of contact. The deployment was launched at dawn, when ground search teams could begin moving under temporarily more stable weather conditions than the previous night, though the snowstorm had not fully cleared. A search corridor map was immediately created in the coordination room, dividing the entire standard route into logical segments based on terrain, accessibility, and likelihood of accidents in thick snow. Segments were numbered sequentially from the departure area at Townsend Mine, through low tree lines near the town of Rainsford, along the road leading into the Highwood Valley, and approaching the area near Belt. Segment division helped coordinate forces efficiently, ensuring no overlapping coverage and avoiding missed areas prone to concealment. Each SAR team was equipped with segment maps, positioning devices, and scene-marking tools. Team 1 was responsible for the area from Townsend to midway through the Rainsford corridor, focusing on curved sections, elevated bridges, and stretches prone to skidding and snow. Team 2 was assigned to the area adjacent to Rainsford-Dumber-Highwood foothills, where large snowdrifts began forming and could conceal tire tracks or fallen objects. Team 3 handled the area near Belt, the final point on the standard route, before the road began descending toward Great Falls. All search forces were required to scan in a parallel zigzag pattern along the road axis to optimize detection of any abnormalities on the ground. Throughout the morning and early afternoon, SAR teams conducted continuous observations, scanning both sides of the road with extended distances of 10 to 20 meters depending on terrain. Teams paid special attention to locations where heavy trucks might encounter difficulties, such as narrow slopes, sections heavily affected by crosswinds, and areas prone to ice pockets. However, all checked segments recorded no traces such as fresh tire marks, heavy vehicle skid marks, metal fragments, broken glass, or personal items left behind. Some areas had snow so thick it completely covered the road surface, making the search more difficult. However, even in spots where strong winds exposed parts of the road, SAR found no signs of unusual movement consistent with a 3-truck convoy. Sections deemed high risk for loss of control, such as sharp curves with steep banks beside drainage ditches, were thoroughly inspected but showed no evidence of skidding or collision. The heavy snowfall from the previous night was the primary obstructing factor, as any tire tracks, if present, could have been erased within minutes under strong winds and continuous snow. By the end of the day, when all segments of the standard route from Townsend to Belt had been fully scanned without yielding any physical signs that the convoy had passed through or encountered an incident, SAR teams reported that the ground search area along this route likely did not contain the incident scene. This forced the coordination department to consider the possibility that the convoy had left the standard route at some point after departing Geyser, although there was currently no direct evidence to conclude the turn direction or route change location. Immediately after SAR forces completed the ground scan along the standard Townsend-Belt route, without discovering any physical traces related to the 3 missing trucks, the Judith Basin Sheriff Coordination Department decided to escalate the search to aerial scale, requesting assistance from the Civil Air Patrol to survey the entire rugged terrain around the Highwood Mountains, particularly Highwood Canyon and the Belt Creek River corridor. CAP deployed 2 flight crews, each consisting of a pilot and an observer, equipped with high-resolution cameras, infrared observation devices, and sensors to detect objects with strong reflectivity potential. The entire mission was planned under still unstable weather conditions, with light snow and intermittent gusts, but visibility was sufficient for high-altitude scanning. The takeoff point was chosen as the small airport near Belt, where CAP could quickly take off and land if weather changed suddenly. Shortly after 08:08 a.m., the first flight crew began scanning along the eastern slope of Highwood Canyon, where steep gradients and ground cut into numerous small valleys. This was one of the areas deemed likely for an accident if the convoy deviated from the standard route. Throughout the observation flight, onboard cameras continuously recorded surface color changes to identify potential metal objects buried under snow, while the observer monitored directly from the window for anomalies such as dark streaks, depressions, or disruptions in the snow cover. However, across the entire initial scan area, no signs indicated a large object had fallen or slid into this zone. The second flight crew simultaneously conducted surveys along Belt Creek, an area with winding terrain deemed a place where a heavy vehicle could lose control if entering a small road or turning incorrectly. Infrared observation equipment was activated to check for unusual heat signals, in case areas covered by ice and snow still retained heat differences from metal underneath absorbing and emitting heat slowly. However, infrared scans returned empty results. All ground signals were uniform with ambient temperature and showed no large heat signatures matching the characteristics of 3 large trucks. Beyond heat signal scanning, CAP also monitored areas where Belt Creek's flow could drag objects fallen from high roads, such as vehicle bodies or detached parts. But the water surface showed no unusual colors, no floating objects, and no points indicating broken ice or disturbed soil and rocks near the convoy's loss of contact time. When CAP shifted to the dense forest south of Highwood foothills, where thick canopy could conceal large objects, onboard cameras continuously filmed in parallel strips to ensure no gaps between flight paths. However, thick snow covering the canopy and ground below made identifying objects deep underneath nearly impossible. Even so, CAP maintained continuous scanning, recording areas with minor surface snow variations for post-analysis, but no shapes or textures appeared consistent with convoy-related signs. Near Highwood Ridge, strong winds forced CAP to adjust flight altitude, but observation equipment operated normally. Collected data continued to show ground uniformity, with no sinkholes, no long slide paths, and no snow disruptions in patterns that large-weight trucks could create. By the afternoon of the search deployment day, when the entire Highwood Canyon and Belt Creek areas had been scanned at least twice, CAP compiled a report to the Judith Basin Sheriff, stating clearly that no heat signals, metal reflections, or abnormal terrain signs were detected. The report also emphasized that continuous snowfall on the night of the convoy's disappearance could have completely covered all traces, meaning aerial search results were not conclusive that the area contained no scene, only that with current observation data, no evidence existed to locate the convoy from an aerial perspective. Thus, although CAP comprehensively scanned key terrain corridors, the aerial search operation still yielded no direct clues about the location or status of the missing convoy. Immediately after the ground, SAR teams and Civil Air Patrol failed to obtain any direct signs of the convoy's location. The Judith Basin Sheriff's Investigation Unit shifted focus to the CB radio communication data, which was the only channel recording interactions between the convoy and the dispatch center in the final hours before loss of contact. The radio analysis became a critical task to precisely determine the moment the signal was cut, assess the level of interference related to the snowstorm, and search for any unusual sounds that might provide clues about an incident occurring just before the signal was lost. First, the Recording Department of Montana Minerals Transport provided the full files of the CB communications recorded on the channel assigned to the convoy. This data included communication activity from 1730 to approximately 2014. The analysis team extracted the original recordings, backed them up, and divided them into segments by time markers to reduce noise during processing. The synchronization of the recording department's clock with the system clock at the sheriff's office was performed to ensure time discrepancy did not exceed 2-3 seconds, allowing for an accurate determination of when the signal was completely cut. The review results showed that the last response heard by dispatch from the convoy was around 2012 when a driver reported strong winds and heavy snow. From 2012 to 2014, the signal became intermittent, interspersed with prolonged segments of white noise, and at exactly 20,000–14,006, the entire signal was completely disconnected. The analysis team confirmed that there were no further signal packets after that point, not even background noise. This was considered the official time the convoy lost contact. After establishing the loss of signal timestamp, the next step was to analyze the noise patterns. Audio technicians isolated frequency bands, compared them with snowstorm interference data from NOAA, and cross-referenced signal patterns from several similar weather-related incidents in Montana in previous years. Initial analysis showed that most of the interference from 2012 to 2014 exhibited characteristics of atmospheric static, commonly occurring when snowstorms create ionized layers that disrupt short-range radio waves. However, interspersed among the atmospheric noise segments were some distinctly different signal patterns, including sudden amplitude spikes, prompting the investigation team to categorize them separately to evaluate whether they could be engine sounds, impacts, or heavily distorted human voices. When amplifying the signal segment from 20,000, 13,000, 13,000, 1339, the analysis team detected a discontinuous audio segment lasting a few seconds, containing sounds resembling human speech but severely choked by noise, making it impossible to accurately determine the content. Based on spectral analysis, this signal exhibited characteristics of human voice, but was stretched and distorted due to magnetic field interference, resulting in unconnected high and low frequency patches. Some discrete syllables were audible, including a sound similar to cow followed by a short syllable, but the sound structure was not clear enough to confirm whether it was a person's name or any other word. There were no other sounds clear enough to identify braking, object impacts, or wind whistling through mechanical gaps factors commonly analyzed in accidents involving heavy vehicles. The analysis team noted that the signal segment could be the result of overlapping interference between speech and ionization signals caused by the snowstorm, causing the human voice portion to shift into the high-frequency band. Due to the poor signal quality and lack of a high-resolution original recording for deeper analysis, the only recovered audio segment was classified as insufficient for independent investigative value. However, it was retained as supporting data, noting the possibility that a convoy member attempted to communicate something just before the signal was completely cut, with the overall conclusion precisely determining the loss of signal timestamp, confirming most interference originated from the snowstorm, and acknowledging that the discrete sounds lacked sufficient basis for inferring specific events. The investigation team was forced to terminate the CB radio analysis direction as it yielded no further exploitable value. When technical data could not be expanded further, the most logical next step was to return to the only source that had directly recorded the convoy's presence before disappearance, the Geyser gas station, where transaction records confirmed all 3 trucks stopped for fuel at 1855. Early the next morning, after completing the Civil Air Patrol aerial sweep, the Judith Basin Sheriff's investigation team approached the gas station to re-verify all timelines, inspect on-site conditions, and search for any signs, behaviors, or unusual interactions that could shed light on the final hours before the convoy returned to the route and vanished from communication systems. The employee on duty that evening, the only witness to the convoy stop, was invited to work with the investigation team. In his initial statement, he confirmed that the 3 trucks arrived almost consecutively, lined up in the exact transport order the company typically followed. The drivers got out to open fuel caps, made payments at the counter, and exhibited no unusual behavior related to operational techniques or vehicle conditions. The station employee also verified that the 1855 timestamp on the receipts was accurate, as the payment system was synchronized with the internal computer using the county's standard time. However, when asked about the activities of accompanying personnel in the convoy, the employee stated he overheard a tense-toned conversation among a group of workers standing near truck number Toftrees, truck number 2, though he could not recall specifics due to wind noise and idling engines drowning out most sounds. He could only describe that one of them seemed dissatisfied with progress or urged haste, but there was no violent behavior or notable gestures. When asked whether Supervisor Calvin Raleigh participated in the conversation or issued instructions at the gas station, the employee recalled that Raleigh paid the fuel bills for all 3 trucks and urged the group to work quickly to resume the journey. However, this level of urging did not exceed previous transports in his memory, and he could not determine it as a sign of conflict or anything unusual. The investigation team recorded this statement as indirect information insufficient to build suspicion. After completing the interview with the gas station employee, the investigation team requested to review any security footage. In 1997, the Geyser gas station was equipped with only a single fixed camera positioned at the front entrance to the payment area, primarily to monitor customers during transactions. The recording device had low resolution and captured only 5 frames per second, making facial or gesture identification difficult. Nevertheless, the investigators copied the entire video segment from 1840 to 1920 for cross-referencing with the statement. The camera footage confirmed that the 3 trucks appeared at the timestamp matching the receipt system. Personnel moved normally between the fueling area and entrance, and there were no signs of pushing, shoving, or easily identifiable unusual behavior. Some hand movements among individuals in shadowed areas were not clear enough to determine whether they were arguments, technical discussions, or normal actions while standing in cold weather. When cross-referencing the video with the employee's statement, the investigation team concluded that a tense-toned conversation may have occurred near truck number 2, but the video showed no images confirming the degree of tension or nature of conflict. There were no words or strong gestures captured by the camera, and the conversation area was outside the lighted zone, resulting in only blurry moving shapes. Investigators viewed the video multiple times, zooming in locally to search for unusual signs, such as holding objects, pointing, or arguing, but found nothing to expand the investigation direction. Additionally, whistling wind and station air compressor noise rendered the captured audio nearly useless. Tracking the convoy's movement after leaving the station was also limited, as the camera only recorded until they turned toward Highway 89, but did not capture the subsequent direction. Therefore, the investigation team could only confirm that the convoy departed the station around 19,088 and continued the journey without clear signs of behavioral changes or route alterations at that time. The statement about an argument among some group members was recorded, but insufficient to form any investigative assumptions about the nature of the conflict or its severity. The overall conclusion was documented. The Geyser gas station verified the convoy's presence. Timestamp. Personnel performed normal fueling operations. There may have been a raised voice conversation, but insufficient basis to attribute it as a dispute or conflict related to the cause of disappearance. After completing the review of all direct information sources related to the convoy's journey, including data from the Geyser gas station, security video, and CB radio analysis, the Judith Basin Sheriff's investigation team shifted to examining the technical records of all 3 trucks to determine vehicle conditions before departing the mine and assess the possibility of mechanical failure contributing to the convoy's disappearance. Montana Minerals Transport provided complete maintenance logs, repair reports, lists of items inspected in November 1997, and records of each truck's condition immediately before departure. When cross-referencing these records, the investigation team focused particularly on truck number 2, as it was the vehicle reported to have shown abnormalities during operational preparation. According to maintenance records, truck number 2 had been found to have reduced auxiliary brake efficiency during a routine inspection 3 days before the trip. The technical description clearly stated that the auxiliary brake holding force was below allowable operational standards, and the maintenance department recommended replacing a brake assembly or at least adjusting the mechanism to avoid brake loss risk on downhill sections. However, in the same record, the post-supplementary inspection status section was marked meets requirements with the confirming signature of Supervisor Calvin Raleigh. This prompted the investigation team to more closely examine the entire chain of information related to the reevaluation of the truck's condition. When retrieving records from the maintenance team, investigators found no repair or parts replacement documentation performed between the time the fault was recorded and the convoy's departure. The record showed no brake assembly replacement, no notes on brake force readjustment, and no technical operation codes in the system, completely contradicting the meets operational requirements approval signed by Raleigh. The investigation team continued cross-referencing with the technician's work logs on the trip preparation day. One technician had an informal note in his personal logbook that truck number 22 needs reinspection of auxiliary brake when time allows, indicating awareness of the issue, but no thorough resolution. However, there was no evidence this note was escalated to a formal request or notified to management. This situation led investigators to consider the possibility that truck number 22 left the mine with an unrepaired brake fault as recommended. This was significant because on the hilly terrain of the Highwood area, a heavy truck without properly functioning auxiliary brakes would easily lose control, especially in snowfall and slippery road conditions. To ensure accurate cross-verification, the investigation team requested Montana Minerals Transport provide all internal communications between the supervisor and maintenance team in the week leading to the trip. The company provided several internal emails showing Raleigh had urged completion of vehicle preparation due to a compressed weekly transport schedule caused by a prior delay, leaving the maintenance team less time to address technical issues. Meanwhile, the transport schedule required the convoy to depart the mine within the designated window to meet next-day delivery. This placed Raleigh in a position potentially under schedule pressure, leading him to sign off inspected without waiting for recommended repairs to be completed. Additionally, records for trucks number 1 and number 3 showed no outstanding technical issues. Both passed weekly maintenance inspections with pass results. This further highlighted truck number 2 as the focal point when evaluating mechanical incident potential. The investigation team also reviewed truck number 2's brake history over the prior 6 months. The truck had reported reduced brake efficiency twice, but each time repairs were properly documented. The only instance without proper repair documentation was the most recent brake fault immediately before the trip. When all information was compiled, the investigation team prepared a preliminary conclusion report. Truck number 2 had an unrepaired brake fault, contrary to technical recommendations. The meets requirements confirmation was signed by Calvin Raleigh, and no documentation proved repairs were performed before departure. However, the report also emphasized that while the brake fault could contribute to a potential incident, current data was insufficient to determine this mechanical issue as the direct cause of the convoy's disappearance or a serious incident. It continued to be categorized as a technical clue requiring cross-referencing with other data to determine truck number 2's role in the entire convoy's disappearance. After determining that truck number 2 had an unrepaired brake fault per technical recommendations, despite being signed off as meets requirements by Supervisor Calvin Raleigh, The investigation team moved to technical analysis to assess the impact of this brake issue on accident potential along the convoy's route. The analysis objective was to simulate the convoy's real-world operating conditions at the time of disappearance, including cargo weight, average speed, route gradients, and weather factors such as strong winds and ice snow. The investigation team collaborated with a mechanical engineer specializing in heavy vehicles to build a velocity-weight simulation model for truck number 2. Based on transport records, truck number 2 carried the largest manganese ore load among the three, estimated near maximum capacity. This load increased inertia and reduced braking ability on slippery roads, especially with ineffective auxiliary brakes. In the simulation, when traveling downhill sections leading into the highwood area, required braking force to maintain stable speed decreased significantly compared to dry conditions, while lateral skid force increased sharply due to snow cover and gusting winds, creating loss of control risk if the driver did not reduce speed early. The simulation showed that if truck number T2's auxiliary brake did not meet standards, the driver would rely entirely on primary brakes, which easily overheat during prolonged low-speed use in bad weather. When temperature exceeded limits, primary brakes could temporarily fail, causing the truck to accelerate beyond expectation. This scenario was deemed entirely plausible in the conditions when the convoy passed through the heavily storm-affected area. After simulating individual parameters, the investigation team proceeded to simulate the three-truck convoy formation. Under normal conditions, wide spacing between large trucks was maintained to avoid collisions during emergency braking. However, when visibility dropped below safe levels due to the snowstorm, maintaining standard spacing became more difficult. If truck number 2 began sliding or accelerating unintentionally downhill, the lead truck number 1 might not detect the danger in time to react. The simulation also showed that trailing truck number 3 would have even less time to respond if the two front trucks lost control, especially with heavy loads increasing inertia. When simulating brake failure occurring as the convoy entered the initial downhill section of the highwood foothills, the investigation team noted that if truck number 2 accelerated unintentionally by just 15 to 20% above safe speed, the risk of colliding with truck number 1 or pushing it off the roadway became very high. This was particularly notable, given thick snow cover reducing traction. The simulation also indicated that in narrow curves in the highwood area, if truck number 2 could not decelerate entering a curve, inertia would cause it to veer off the roadway or push the lead truck toward the edge, where there were no guardrails. This created potential for a chain reaction accident. Truck number 1 pushed off first, truck number 2 continuing forward by inertia, and truck number 3 unable to evade due to limited visibility or excessive slipperiness. The investigation team also tested scenarios where truck number 2 skidded right or left before complete brake failure. When lateral force exceeded limits, the truck would follow a slight rotational path, enough to make truck number 1 unable to predict the trajectory, increasing inter-vehicle collision likelihood. In the context of close convoy travel under low visibility and severe weather, even a small deviation in speed or steering angle could trigger an uncontrollable chain reaction. Beyond velocity and inertia analysis, the investigation team evaluated the possibility that truck number 2's driver detected the issue too late to respond. The driver may have attempted deceleration, but braking force was insufficient for immediate effect. When recreating this, the simulation showed the truck could continue forward several hundred meters before slowing enough to stabilize. And downhill combined with snow could extend braking distance many times compared to dry conditions. From the comprehensive simulation, the investigation team concluded that the brake fault on truck number 2 significantly increased the risk of a chain reaction accident during the convoy's journey, particularly on downhill sections in the highwood area. However, despite simulations showing multiple severe accident scenarios, the investigation team could not yet determine that a mechanical failure such as brake loss was the direct cause of the convoy's complete disappearance, as no physical evidence was found along the standard route to confirm an accident had occurred. After completing the technical simulation phase to evaluate the possibility of truck number 2 losing its brakes and causing a chain reaction accident under adverse weather conditions, the Judith Basin Sheriff's investigation team proceeded to the terrain survey step to identify all high-risk locations where a heavy vehicle could veer off the road or be swept down the slopes in the highwood area. The goal was to establish a list of hazardous terrain points to prioritize the search scope. especially since the technical simulations showed that even a slight deviation in speed or steering angle could be enough to cause the vehicle to leave the safe roadway. The investigation team collaborated with a county terrain specialist to analyze elevation maps, geological data, and aerial photographs from previous years. Although the standard Townsend-Brawl-Tomba route is not one with many deep ravines like the mountainous areas in western Montana, it still features steep slopes, deep gullies, natural cliffs, and narrow crevices that could become drop points if a heavy truck lost control on slippery road surfaces. To create an official list, the investigation team divided the entire route into smaller segments and marked areas with slopes of 12% or greater, or where the road ran close to terrain edges with significant elevation differences between the roadway and the underlying rock layers. From this analysis process, they identified 13 high-risk points stretching from the sparse forest area north of Rainsford to the section adjacent to Highwood Canyon. Each point was evaluated based on 3 parameters: potential depth if a vehicle fell, roadway slope, and the presence of natural obstacles that could cause the vehicle to lose stability. Some points were along the winding sections of Highway 89, where sudden drops in slope created an overrun effect if the vehicle failed to slow down in time. Others were at intersections between the main road and small private access roads, where thick ice could cause the driver to inadvertently oversteer. At each location, the investigation team used inclinometers and terrain maps to calculate the estimated depth of the ravine or gully if a vehicle left the roadway. Some locations were determined to have depths exceeding 30 meters, sufficient to bury a large vehicle when combined with thick snow and rock debris. However, when the investigators attempted to access these points for detailed, on-site documentation, they encountered the biggest obstacle of the entire operation: thick snow. The snow that fell on the night the convoy disappeared was not only deep, but also piled into drifts by strong winds, creating areas with snow depths of 1 and 2 meters. This made approaching the cliff edges extremely difficult and even dangerous, as it was impossible to determine where solid ground ended and where snow-covered voids began. The investigators could only stand several meters back from the edges to take measurements, but could not look down into the ravines to check for foreign objects, tire tracks, or any signs of disturbance. In many areas, the continuous snow cover made it difficult to even distinguish the boundary between the road and the edge. At some points, the investigation team used probing poles to assess snow compaction. The results showed that the snow surface could completely conceal large skid marks or fallen objects, especially since strong winds continuously redeposited snow for hours after the disappearance. At other locations, investigators tried to evaluate snow stability by checking for sinking or settling under applied force, but the excessive depth made any analysis unreliable. Despite using high-magnification binoculars and long-range observation equipment, none of the 13 surveyed points showed readily visible anomalies such as freshly exposed soil, broken trees, or any discontinuous gouges consistent with the trajectory of a heavy truck falling. Another issue limiting the survey was the constant change in snow surface due to strong winds. Within less than half a day, snowdrifts would be blown away and then refilled by new accumulations, erasing any traces that might have existed within hours. The investigation team noted that although the list of 13 high-risk points accurately reflected locations where accidents could occur on the standard route, the field survey provided no verifiable data to link any specific point to the convoy's disappearance. The internal conclusion for the terrain analysis phase was, although the standard route has many potential risk locations, thick snow and strong winds made deeper inspection completely infeasible at the time the operation took place. Given that the entire terrain survey yielded no useful discoveries, the Judith Basin Sheriff directed the investigation team to move to a comprehensive synthesis of all data collected from late 1997 to early 1998. The objective of this synthesis phase was to conduct an overall assessment of the case file based on all field reports, technical analyses, witness statements, CB radio data, and internal records from Montana Minerals Transport, to determine whether any clues or consistent information chain existed that could form a substantiated hypothesis about the cause of the convoy's disappearance. The ground SAR reports indicated that no physical traces such as tire marks, skid marks, debris, or roadway disturbances were found along the entire standard Townsend-Jarrell belt route. The Civil Air Patrol also found no signs from aerial searches, including heat signatures, metallic reflections, or terrain changes that might suggest a fall or collision site. CB radio analysis showed that the convoy's communications cut off completely at 2014, but no audio was clear enough to identify a specific incident or distress call. A distorted audio segment was recorded in the few seconds before signal loss, but heavy interference made the content uninterpretable as valuable investigative evidence. Witness statements from Geyser gas station employees confirmed the convoy stopped for fuel on schedule and showed no clearly unusual behavior beyond a raised voice exchange whose severity could not be determined. The station's security cameras also captured no images indicating conflict or unusual incidents due to low quality and limited viewing angles. In the technical analysis portion, the investigation team noted the unrepaired brake issue on truck number 2, suggesting the vehicle may not have met safety standards for travel on steep routes. However, this conclusion was insufficient to confirm a mechanical accident occurred, as the entire route and the 13 high-risk ravine points provided no physical evidence, an essential factor for linking the accident hypothesis to an actual scene. Montana Minerals Transport's internal records showed no unusual directives or conflicts prior to the trip, aside from a compressed transport schedule that shortened vehicle preparation time. This could have led to Raleigh approving technical readiness before repairs were complete, but the investigation team could not conclude this caused the disappearance without experimental evidence. When synthesizing the above data, the investigation team found that all information faced significant limitations, primarily stemming from weather and terrain conditions at the time of the incident. The November 12 snowstorm created an unusually thick snow layer sufficient to erase all traces whether the convoy skidded, fell into a ravine, or lost control on the road. Strong winds caused snow to continuously shift, filling gullies or depressions within hours, ensuring any surface evidence could not survive until search teams arrived. Steep slopes in many areas of the Highwood foothills and Belt Creek corridor made accessing ravine bottoms nearly impossible in winter, especially when snow cover could conceal voids or deep crevices, preventing safe direct observation by search teams. Even aerial cameras were insufficient to penetrate thick snow or ice-covered tree canopies. These natural limitations meant the investigation team could not determine whether the convoy suffered an accident, took a wrong turn, or stopped at a remote location outside the search area. With no physical clues, no scene, no distress signals, and no direct witnesses, the case reached a state where every hypothesis could neither be confirmed nor refuted. Based on the comprehensive synthesis, the 1998 report recommended temporarily suspending direct investigative activities until weather conditions improved or new reliable information emerged. The report emphasized that continuing to expand the search in traditional ways would yield near-zero results while increasing risks to search personnel. The investigation process shifted to passive monitoring status, to be reactivated only upon new data grounds. This was the concluding step, affirming that the direct search phase produced no meaningful progress and further deployment of personnel would not yield results in the current context. 3 years after the direct search phase was temporarily suspended due to the absence of any physical evidence and weather factors rendering expanded scene efforts infeasible, the Montana Minerals Transport Convoy disappearance file was transferred to the state's Cold Case Review Program in 2001 for a re-examination of core data from a post-event analytical perspective, particularly focusing on meteorological factors and the possibility that the convoy deviated from the standard route at an undetermined point after leaving the Geyser gas station. The objective of this review was to reassess all November 1997 weather data using newer analytical tools while considering the possibility that Supervisor Calvin Raleigh considered or executed a route change a hypothesis previously deemed insufficiently supported during the initial investigation. The 2001 Cold Case Review began with reconstructing the November 12 snowstorm map using more detailed NOAA data, which by then had digitized many old records and provided temperature, wind speed, and snow density data by hourly intervals for small areas. Investigators reloaded all meteorological data and used analysis software to simulate storm propagation, paths of strong wind bands, and time snow coverage. The reconstructed map results showed 2 distinct snowstorm regions over central Montana on November 12, the first along the standard Highway 89 route, extending from Rainsford to Belt, the second offset eastward, covering the Highwood Bench area, and extending down a segment of the alternate route that Raleigh was known to have intended for use in a few prior transports. The second storm region over the alternate route was determined to have the highest intensity in the entire area, with stronger wind gusts, higher snow density, and longer storm duration compared to the standard route. When comparing hourly weather maps, investigators noted that between approximately 1932 2020, the exact time the convoy was traveling from Geyser toward High Wood. The larger storm region was concentrated over the alternate route rather than the standard one. This created a new hypothesis. If the convoy inadvertently or deliberately turned onto a side route, or even deviated slightly from the standard, they could have driven directly into the strongest storm area. To assess the likelihood of Raleigh changing routes, the 2001 cold case team re-examined all personnel files and transport records from Montana Minerals Transport for the 6 months prior to the disappearance. They discovered that Raleigh had twice proposed route adjustments to optimize delivery times, though these were not implemented due to the company's winter safety priority. Some drivers, according to HR notes, mentioned that Raleigh sometimes independently decided to alter routes when road conditions were good or to shorten travel time. These notes were not considered violations at the time, but in the disappearance context, they became valuable analytical data. However, the review team also noted that all instances of Raleigh changing routes occurred in dry weather conditions, with no reports of him adjusting routes during snowstorms or low visibility. When cross-referencing meteorological data with the convoy's travel timeline from 1740 to 2014, Cold Case 2001 found that if the convoy turned onto the alternate route after leaving Geyser at an intersection a few miles from the station, they would have entered the period when the second storm region reached peak intensity. This was not apparent in the initial 1997 assessment because meteorological data then lacked small area detail. Nevertheless, the investigation team found no technical evidence or statements confirming the convoy entered the alternate route. There were no traffic cameras, no witnesses, and no tire traces due to thick snow erasing all surface signs. Raleigh's past consideration of the alternate route provided only possibility, not investigative grounds. The 2001 Cold Case Review concluded that the alternate route overlapped completely with the strongest storm region during the 2010-2020 window, 1, creating a high-risk area that could lead to a serious incident if the convoy entered it. However, the review team also emphasized that available data was insufficient to confirm the convoy traveled there, and the route change hypothesis was retained only as an open possibility to be considered alongside others. By 2005, the Montana Minerals Transport Convoy Disappearance File continued to undergo periodic review under the Cold Case Review Program after the 2001 analysis concluded that meteorological factors might play a significant role but provided no definitive evidence of the convoy's actual travel route. In this review, the investigation team focused on a new direction, examining all company financial records, operational logs, and material handover ledgers for anomalies that might indirectly relate to the convoy's disappearance. The reason for this investigative direction stemmed from the fact that, beyond weather, some past heavy transport disappearance cases had roots in internal financial irregularities or cargo fraud, making such transports sensitive points. Investigators collected all manganese ore handover ledgers from Montana Minerals for the 6 months prior to November 1997, including extraction figures, transport figures, storage figures, and production reports sent to the receiving facility in Great Falls. When cross-checking each data chain, the review team discovered a recurring anomaly. The ore quantity recorded at the transport stage was higher than the quantity confirmed at the receiving facility in several deliveries prior to the missing convoy. Although the discrepancy was not large per shipment, its repetition prompted questions about the accuracy of the weight recording system. The variances ranged from tens to over 100 pounds per shipment levels, significant enough to be noted if the load scale maintenance system operated accurately. To check for technical error possibilities, the Cold Case Review requested maintenance records for the scales and quality control procedures at both the Townsend mine and the receiving facility. Records showed the scale systems were calibrated per procedure with no notes of errors or unusual variances in the relevant period. When cross-referencing these figures with personnel assignment tables, investigators noted that Calvin Raleigh was the only individual with direct access to transport handover ledgers in both directions. He signed for loads from the mine and signed transfers at the receiving facility. This did not violate operating regulations, but created conditions where he could influence data if desired, as no rule required independent dual signatures at the time. The investigation team continued reviewing original handover forms, including Raleigh's signatures and driver's signatures for each transport. Some forms showed minor differences in notation style, such as a few lines written in slightly different handwriting or faster strokes compared to Raleigh's characteristic script in personnel files. This was insufficient to conclude forgery since handover forms were sometimes spilled out by drivers or assistants before Raleigh approved. but the investigation team still noted the anomaly for overall analysis. When expanding the review to Montana Minerals' internal reports, the cold case review found 3 quality reports noting queries from the receiving facility that some late 1997 ore lots had lower weights than expected compared to recorded mine production. Although the discrepancies fell within the company's allowable threshold for natural transport loss, their continuous appearance over several months drew attention because it coincided with the period Raleigh handled most transport shifts. From this data, the investigation team began considering the possibility of systematic discrepancies in weight recording procedures, not necessarily criminal, but potentially related to data adjustments to meet production targets or internal profit allocation. In personnel reports, Raleigh was described as a long-tenured employee often assigned critical transports, giving him higher control than other supervisors. However, when reviewing Raleigh's personal financial records, the investigation team found no clear anomalies, such as unexplained income, sudden asset changes, debts, or suspicious transactions. This prevented the financial investigation from advancing further at the individual level. Nevertheless, upon re-examining 1997 company bonus structures, the investigation team noted that a small portion of supervisor bonuses depended on compliance with delivery schedules and transport productivity. This factor could create incentive for Raleigh to quickly approve vehicle readiness despite incomplete repairs or to make minor handover data adjustments to meet progress requirements. When combining all information, the 2005 cold case review concluded that discrepancies between extraction and transport figures were real, recurring, and Raleigh was the sole person with access to both critical recording steps. However, investigators also emphasized there was no direct evidence showing these discrepancies related to the convoy disappearance or indicated criminal behavior. Thus, the financial investigative direction was recorded as an expanded possibility, providing context that Raleigh had high control over information flow and transport processes, but could not be directly linked to the cause of the convoy's disappearance. By 2008, following 2 prior cold case reviews, one focused on meteorological factors and the other on financial and internal company operations, the file on the disappearance of the Montana Minerals transport convoy was brought in for a new round of analysis. This marked the point when the cold case unit began applying new generation accident simulation software, which allowed for the reconstruction of scenarios involving vehicles veering off the road or being pulled down steep slopes based on parameters such as terrain, weight, speed, and weather conditions. The goal of the 2008 review was to assess the possibility that the convoy had met with an accident at one of the 13 high-risk ravine points identified during the initial investigation phase, and to examine whether the terrain features, combined with heavy snowfall conditions, could have been sufficient to completely bury all 3 trucks without leaving any traces on the surface. First, the investigation team recollected all detailed terrain data stored in the county's GIS system, including elevation models, slope maps, geological structures, and old transportation agency drawings showing road surface shapes and drainage ditches. Maps of the 13 ravine points were digitized and imported into the simulation software to create a 3-dimensional terrain model with higher accuracy than previous tools. The investigators then entered into the system the weight data for the 3 trucks, cargo load, vehicle length, center of gravity placement, and force distribution capabilities when the vehicle was impacted on a slope. The simulation software allowed testing multiple scenarios, including the case of truck number 2 losing brakes while entering a downhill section, the case of truck number 1 being pushed off the road due to a rear-end collision, and the case of truck number 3 being unable to react in time when the 2 trucks ahead encountered trouble. When running the simulation for the scenario of truck number 2 losing brakes at ravine point number 2, for a location with a steep slope and a drop of more than 25 meters from the road surface to the bottom, the software indicated that if the truck fell from that height during heavy snowfall, it could impact the bottom with enough force to deform the front and sides, while also creating a large depression due to the vehicle's mass combined with the softness of the snow layer. Subsequently, if strong winds continued to push snow down from the slope, the scene could be completely covered in just 1-2 hours. When simulating the case of all 3 trucks falling in sequence due to inertia, the software showed that the second and third trucks could end up in the same location or nearby areas if the distance between the vehicles was close enough and the drivers could not control the vehicles due to poor visibility. However, notably, all 3 trucks could be completely buried under fresh snow if the fall coincided with the peak of the blizzard, when strong winds carried snow from the mountainside to cover the entire surface in a short time. Simulations of ravine point Number 9. An area with a gentler slope but narrow shoulders on both sides of the road showed that if a truck fell into an area with dense trees, the canopy could reduce the impact force and create temporary cover, causing the truck to become lodged in a narrow crevice between two slopes. In such conditions, just a new snow layer, a few dozen centimeters thick, would be enough to completely obscure the cab roof or vehicle body. When combined with dense forest terrain, aerial observation capability was also significantly limited, explaining why the Civil Air Patrol did not detect any metal reflections during the initial search. The investigation team continued running simulations with strong wind parameters to assess the degree of snow displacement after the incident. The software showed that at wind speeds of 30 to 40 miles per hour, snow from higher elevations could slide quickly down the mountainside, recovering any disturbed area within 1 to 2 hours. If the road section had crosswinds, the snow layer could level out all tire skid marks or areas of soil torn from the ravine edge. Thus, the simulations confirmed the possibility that the road surface could return to its original state just hours later, making it impossible for SAR to detect traces when approaching the next morning. An important part of the 2008 review was evaluating the potential depth at which the three trucks could be buried. When simulating the case of the truck falling into ravine point number 11, an area with thicker than normal snow accumulation due to concave terrain, the software showed that the truck could lie under snow more than 3 meters deep if fresh snow continued to pile up. Afterward, this depth would be sufficient to completely conceal the entire vehicle, including the metal cargo bed, making detection by visual means or from the air virtually impossible. The investigation team also simulated the case of a truck becoming trapped under soft soil and rock due to minor landslides triggered by the vibration from the fall. In this simulation, the slope could slide down in small sections, combining with snowfall to bury the truck under a mixed soil snow layer thick enough to completely cover it. These results reinforced the assessment that if the truck fall occurred during the blizzard, the possibility of the three vehicles being completely buried without leaving surface traces was entirely plausible. However, the investigation team also noted that although the simulations presented many physically viable possibilities consistent with the accident hypothesis, there was no field data, ground search, or aerial observation confirming that any simulated scenario had actually occurred. Therefore, the conclusion of the 2008 cold case review only went as far as stating that an accident involving the trucks falling at one of the 13 ravine points was a plausible scenario, but there was insufficient legal basis or physical evidence to designate a crime scene. In the context where simulations presented possibilities but field evidence provided none, the investigation team shifted to evaluating a key factor that had directly impacted the case's progress: the technological limitations of the 1997-2010 period. This step was necessary to determine whether the lack of modern search technologies such as LiDAR, reconnaissance drones, ground-penetrating sensors, or advanced thermal cameras had contributed to the disappearance remaining unsolved at the initial time, and whether those technologies, if available in 1997, could have detected traces of the convoy in the early days of the blizzard. The review team began by assessing the ground scanning capabilities of the 1997 search forces. At that time, SAR teams and the Civil Air Patrol relied only on traditional tools such as visual observation from fixed-wing aircraft, high-magnification binoculars, 2D elevation maps, and standard low-resolution cameras. There was no equipment capable of penetrating thick snow cover or creating detailed terrain maps under natural cover. A key technology unavailable to the search forces in 1997 was LiDAR. The use of airborne LiDAR for ground scanning only became widespread in the 2010s, particularly in complex terrain areas like dense forests, deep valleys, or mountainsides with multiple layers of tree cover. If LiDAR had been available during the initial search phase, the Civil Air Patrol could have created centimeter-accurate three-dimensional elevation maps, thereby identifying abnormal snow depressions, sinkholes, ground structure changes, or signs of large objects beneath the snow layer. However, in 1997, CAP possessed no LiDAR equipment, and even into the early 2000s, civilian LiDAR had not yet reached widespread availability or reasonable cost for deployment in search and rescue operations. Without LiDAR, all ground assessments in the winter search campaign relied solely on surface observation, which was entirely inadequate when thick snow continuously covered all traces. In addition to LiDAR, another major limitation was the absence of reconnaissance drones. At the time of the incident, civilian drones did not exist on a commonly used scale, and search and rescue drones were completely absent from local force equipment. The lack of drones meant search forces could not access dangerous or hard-to-reach areas, such as ravine edges, gorges, or steeply sloped ground unsafe for human approach. SAR teams had to stand several meters back from ravine edges to observe with the naked eye, and when thick snow erased all traces, low-angle searching became ineffective. If drones equipped with high-resolution or thermal cameras technologies that began becoming common around 2012-2015 had been available, SAR teams could have flown along mountainsides or surveyed closer to the ground, searching for depressions, fall marks, or deformed snow surfaces invisible to the human eye from the road. The absence of drones also limited inspection of areas obscured under tree canopies, where 2008 simulations showed trucks could become lodged and covered by snow in just hours. Beyond drones and LiDAR, the 2008-2009 review team also considered the potential use of ground-penetrating sensors. GPR could detect metal objects or soil rock structure changes at certain depths, but in the late 1990s, this technology was highly limited, expensive, and almost exclusively used in archaeology or geological research, not as rescue force equipment. Even if GPR had been available then, deployment in complex terrain with thick snow would not have been feasible, as GPR performs poorly on uneven surfaces and wet snow layers cause strong signal interference. Another technological limitation was the older generation thermal cameras used by the Civil Air Patrol in the winter search campaign. Those devices had low resolution and poor heat differentiation, especially in thick snow and strong wind conditions that made the surface uniformly cold, making it hard to create the necessary thermal contrast to detect large objects under cover. Modern thermal camera technology can detect differences of a few tenths of a degree C on snow surfaces, but 1997 equipment could only detect exposed objects or those with clear thermal contrast relative to the surroundings. The review team concluded that if the trucks were buried under more than 1 meter of snow, the thermal cameras of that era would have been completely unable to detect them. Additionally, search forces lacked LiDAR-grade elevation maps like those of the modern era. The maps used in the initial investigation were only 2D topo maps with sparse contour lines, insufficiently detailed to detect depressions or small terrain changes that might suggest a localized snowslide caused by a heavy object. Finally, information technology was also a limitation. There was no real-time GPS system for commercial vehicles in 1997, making convoy location determination entirely dependent on CB radio, which was easily disrupted in blizzards. Summarizing all these factors, the cold case review concluded that technological limitations prior to 2010 were one of the biggest reasons the disappearance could not be resolved at the time it occurred. If LiDAR drones and advanced observation technologies like those available today had existed, the chances of detecting convoy traces would have been much higher. However, in the context of 1997 to 2008 technology, the convoy disappearing completely without leaving traces was unavoidable during the initial investigation. By 2014, more than a decade after the active investigation phase ended and the cold case reviews of 2001, 2005, and 2008 all failed to produce significant breakthroughs, the file on the disappearance of the Montana Minerals Transport Manganese Ore Convoy was officially transferred to the Cold Case Montana System estate-level program, specializing in handling missing persons cases, unexplained deaths, or events unresolved by traditional investigation methods. The decision to transfer the file to the state level came after the Judith Basin Sheriff's Office reevaluated all archived documents per the 10-year review regulation, confirming that from 2008 to 2014, no new information had emerged that could impact the investigation direction. Investigators reported no new witnesses appearing, no physical evidence found during civilian activities or construction along the route, and no weather events or landslides in that period exposing traces of large objects matching the three trucks' characteristics. From a public search perspective, activities such as geological surveys, forestry management, or road maintenance in the Rainsford-Highwood Belt area recorded no unusual discoveries, even in previously assessed high-risk zones. This further reinforced the conclusion that if the convoy had met with an accident in 1997, the bodies and vehicles had remained in locations completely inaccessible to conventional search methods for many years. An important part of the decision to transfer to Cold Case Montana stemmed from the emergence of new technologies such as long-range LiDAR, high-resolution survey drones, and next-generation 3D terrain analysis systems being applied statewide in fields including forestry, land management, and transportation infrastructure maintenance. However, although these technologies had begun being used in some other large-scale search operations, no data had been collected during the 2010s along the suspected convoy route or the 13 high-risk ravine areas. In other words, despite technological progress over the 1997-2010 period, no modern surveys had covered areas directly related to the disappearance. This left the file without additional new data sources for analysis. Based on all available information, Raleigh continued to be regarded as one of the 20 victims of the disappearance, with no evidence suggesting he left the convoy or engaged in behavior related to the group's vanishing. All personnel records, shift logs, and CB radio data re-examined in 2013 yielded results identical to the initial investigation phase. Raleigh left the mine with the convoy, appeared at the Geyser gas station, paid for fuel, and had no records of leaving the group after that point. Raleigh's approval of the brake issue on truck number 2 remained viewed as a potential contributing error to an accident, but insufficient to consider him a suspect, as all evidence indicated he left Geyser with the convoy and no data showed him continuing independently or having opportunity to separate from the group. Cold Case Montana received the file with the initial status of group missing, high accident probability, no criminal indicators. During the handover, all investigation documents were digitized, including route maps, SAR reports, meteorological data, vehicle maintenance records, minutes from the 2001, 2005, and 2001 Cold Case reviews, and all CB radio files. The Cold Case Montana program noted the case as one of the state's few largest-scale disappearances, leaving no physical field traces, a rarity in incidents involving heavy vehicles. State-level investigators receiving the file also agreed with the assessment that 1990s technological limitations were the biggest barrier to search success. Additionally, they noted no criminal trends in the area in 1997 matching a human intervention model against such a large convoy. For these reasons, Raleigh continued to be treated as a victim alongside the other 19. The transfer to Cold Case Montana marked a new phase. The file was no longer under the routine investigation scope of the Judith Basin Sheriff, but remained monitored at the state level. Awaiting any new information, terrain data, or reports of large object discoveries from civilian activities that might pave the way for reactivating the investigation in the future. In the summer of 2015, when the case file for the missing Montana Minerals transport convoy had been in the Montana Cold Case system for over a year without any new data, an unexpected natural event revealed the first clue since the winter of 1997. A strong dry lightning storm swept through the Highwood Mountains area in late July, triggering a series of small wildfires, including one that rapidly spread across the dry grassland on the western side of the Highwood foothills. Local firefighters and support crews from neighboring counties were dispatched to contain the burn area, extinguishing the flames before they could spread into the denser tree-filled valleys. Once the initial firefighting was complete and the crews shifted to mop-up operations and damage assessment, a team from the Department of Natural Resources was sent to survey the condition of the soil and rock in the burned areas to evaluate risks of landslides or erosion post-fire. While inspecting the northern slope of the Highwood foothills, a DNR geologist technician noted a small but clear anomaly. A section of the burned ground surface revealed soil with a texture distinctly different from the surrounding area. Based on professional experience, surface soil in the central Montana grasslands is typically quite uniform in density, but this patch showed abnormal compaction, as if heavy weight had once impacted the underlying layers or there had been movement of an object in the past. The technician conducted tests using a simple density measurement tool carried by the fire crew, a device used to assess compaction and landslide potential after fires. The results showed significantly higher compaction at the anomalous spot compared to the surrounding soil, which had only been affected by fire and wind. When expanding the survey to a radius of several meters, the DNR team discovered 3 additional exposed soil points with similarly abnormal density, forming a narrow, elongated strip sloping down with the terrain. This did not match natural soil characteristics or the effects of wildfire, as fire does not cause deep compressive changes in soil structure. The geologist technician immediately noted that these anomalies could be related to a heavy object that impacted the ground in the past, though the cause could not yet be determined. Recognizing the potential importance of the discovery, the DNR team reported it to the County Land Management Office, which had protocols requiring immediate notification to the sheriff if unusual terrain alterations were found in areas flagged in disaster files or cold case records. DNR was unaware that the area they were surveying overlapped with part of the list of 13 high-risk ravine points established by investigators during the 1997 to 1999 search phase. When a report reached the county office, a Montana cold case coordinator on duty noticed the detail about non-uniform compaction on otherwise stable terrain and immediately forwarded the report to the Judith Basin Sheriff's Office. Within hours, the sheriff realized the location marked by the survey team was near ravine point number 71 of the terrain risk areas listed but never fully accessed due to heavy snow during the initial search and lack of supporting technology. The discovery of soil density changes in the exact area previously assessed as a potential vehicle drop-off risk led the sheriff to conclude this could be the first sign related to the disappearance. After nearly 2 decades without any leads, the sheriff's office immediately contacted DNR to request a temporary lockdown of the area to prevent tampering or surface disturbance before a technical evaluation could be organized. The sheriff also requested all location data be transferred to the Montana cold case system for correlation with old investigation data. Map cross-referencing showed the compacted soil location lay directly along the path that, if the convoy had veered off the standard route in limited visibility conditions, they could easily have strayed into the terrain leading down to this spot. Notably, a 2008 elevation map had suggested that if a truck lost control on the slope where strong crosswinds blew, inertia could push it off the road in a direction closely matching the position just discovered by DNR. Though only a surface indication, the degree of alignment between the location and prior terrain simulations was strong enough for the Judith Basin Sheriff to view this as the first breakthrough in nearly 18 years. On the same day the report was received, the sheriff issued an order to reactivate the 1997 missing persons file and move the case out of passive monitoring status in the Montana cold case system, shifting it to active investigation status for the first time since 1998. An emergency survey plan was drawn up, requiring coordination among 3 units: the Judith Basin Sheriff, the Department of Natural Resources, and the state-level terrain analysis technical team. At the same time, the sheriff requested full backups of all related case data, including the 13 ravine point maps, the 2008 simulations, and the 2001 meteorological reports, to prepare for field evaluation based on information accumulated over many years. Reactivating the file not only marked the return of one of Montana's largest missing persons cases, but also raised hope for the first time in nearly 2 decades that the location of the convoy and its 20 victims might lie beneath the very soil layer that the 2015 wildfire had inadvertently exposed. Immediately after the Judith Basin Sheriff reactivated the missing persons file based on the Department of Natural Resources report of abnormal density soil points appearing after the 2015 Highwood fire, the investigation team's next critical step was to deploy modern survey technology to examine the entire suspect area that had previously been obscured by deep snow and dense vegetation. This time, instead of relying on direct observation or fixed-wing aircraft as in 1997, the sheriff requested the use of the state's high-resolution reconnaissance drones equipment local forces had not had access to over the previous nearly 2 decades. The drones were equipped with 4K optical cameras, high-sensitivity infrared sensors, and compact LiDAR units powerful enough to generate 3D terrain models within a narrow scan range. This provided the first opportunity to access the area with technology capable of detecting minor surface deformations that the naked eye or conventional aircraft could not capture. The initial survey took place the following morning when winds had died down and visibility was better, ensuring the drone could maintain stable flight paths along the slope where the DNR team had found the compacted soil points. The drone flew low over the terrain, scanning from higher points down into small valleys and narrow crevices that 1997 ground SAR teams could not reach. After a first flight lasting about 30 minutes, the collected data was processed on-site using LiDAR mapping software, producing a 3D model of the entire surveyed area. As the model appeared, the investigation team immediately noticed an anomaly: a long rectangular structure beneath a thin layer of soil, with light reflectivity nearly matching that of metal materials distinctly different from natural soil and rock. This chain of reflective points formed a straight, elongated shape, with a length approximately matching the cargo bed of the heavy-duty trucks used by Montana Minerals Transport, prompting the entire team to flag this anomaly at the highest priority level. Upon zooming in on the 3D model, finer details revealed parallel straight lines characteristic of a truck chassis. The front section showed a concave deformation consistent with a cabin crushed by strong impact force. The soil covering the object was less than 1 foot thick due to the fire exposing many patches. And it was precisely this that allowed the mini LiDAR's metal reflectivity signals to be clearly captured. In the 3D model, the exposed sections showed large steel frame structures unlike any natural rock in the area and inconsistent with the shapes of wood structures or agricultural equipment previously recorded in the Becorded Highwood region. Notably, the angular edges and reflectivity levels matched the specifications of the steel alloy used in Montana Minerals trucks in 1997. The technical investigator immediately assessed that the object had a very high probability of being a truck frame buried after a violent incident, with subsequent soil, rock, and wildfire ash reducing its cover to the point where the mini LiDAR could detect it. Based on the modeling data, the technical team conducted more detailed mapping by flying the drone at different angles, using both optical and infrared cameras. The infrared camera revealed the object area had different heat retention compared to surrounding soil, reflecting the slow heat absorption and release properties of a large metal frame beneath. Though the difference was not dramatic due to stable morning ambient temperatures, it was sufficient to confirm a large, dense object, likely metal, lay under the surface. While the technical team verified LiDAR data consistency, the drone continued parallel flight paths to ensure no other objects were missed within a several dozen-meter radius of the suspect point. After more than an hour of collection, the data showed only one strongest reflective point, the metal frame, while other areas returned weak signals consistent with natural soil structure. The investigation team immediately marked precise GPS coordinates, latitude, longitude, and elevation, recorded to state standards for entry into the cold case file. When inputting the coordinates into the system of 13 high-risk ravine points, the cross-reference results drew particular attention. The metal object's location was only a few dozen meters from ravine point number 7, in the exact downhill slide direction that the 2008 accident simulation had identified as highest probability if a vehicle lost control in crosswinds and weak braking conditions. This further reinforced the likelihood that the object was one of the 3 trucks from the 1997 convoy. When comparing the frame structure to company truck length and proportions, the 3D model also showed significant matches. The team noted the object length matched ore hauling truck specifications. The front deformation downward indicated possible freefall from a certain height, followed by compression under soil and rock. Additionally, the spacing between steel beams in the 3D model closely matched Montana Minerals truck design, differing markedly from agricultural equipment or commercial container layouts recorded in the region. Establishing precise coordinates immediately became a critical step in transitioning to direct ground access. The coordinates were forwarded to the Department of Natural Resources and Geological Survey Unit for secondary landslide risk analysis before any ground approach. The Sheriff's Office also filed an official update to the Cold Case Montana system, marking this as the first discovery in nearly 18 years with sufficient technical basis to become a direct lead related to the missing convoy. In the quick report sent to the county office, investigators concluded that the drone-detected object had a very high probability of being a buried heavy vehicle. However, confirming vehicle identity or determining the number of objects and frame integrity would require technical excavation based on the newly recorded position. With this discovery, for the first time in nearly 2 decades, the missing persons file was no longer based on hypothesis alone, but had a real survey point for the next investigative steps. After the drone recorded coordinates of the metal object were confirmed to match the structure of a heavy-duty truck, the Judith Basin Sheriff coordinated with the State Geological Technical Team and the Department of Natural Resources to conduct excavation at the suspect site, marking the first ground access step after nearly 2 decades without any tangible traces of the missing convoy. The excavation plan followed strict safety protocols, as the object's location was on a slope with secondary landslide risk due to soil heated by the wildfire and looser terrain structure compared to 1997. During the morning deployment, the survey team used depth probes and soil compaction rods to determine the extent of the thin soil layer above the object. After marking unstable areas, they began removing surface soil manually, avoiding heavy machinery to prevent force impacts that could deform the underlying structure. Just a few hours into digging, the first steel plates of the cab roof emerged, severely deformed as the 3D model had suggested. The metal surface was heavily oxidized but still retained the distinctive shape of a Montana Minerals transport truck cab. The excavation team continued expanding the area to expose the entire cab, and as soil was cleared to the sides, the driver's side and passenger side door frames appeared, showing no signs of having been opened or forced. This aligned with the hypothesis that the cab was crushed upon impact with no escape attempt from inside. As soon as the cab was exposed enough to view the interior, the investigation team discovered the driver and passenger seats severely deformed by impact force. On the driver's seat, the first set of remains appeared, with rib and limb bones trapped in the seat frame, indicating the victim was in position when the impact occurred. Continuing to the rear of the cab, which had 2 additional seats for accompanying personnel, the excavation uncovered 6 more sets of remains in various states of being crushed between frame beams, seats, and interior panels. In total, 7 sets of remains were found in truck number 1's cab, matching the initial personnel assignment for Montana Minerals transport. The positions of the remains indicated no one in the cab had time to escape or perform emergency exit procedures before plunging over the edge, as all were trapped in seated positions or free-fall positions within the cab allied with the primary downward impact force. The forensic team noted no signs of struggle, no evidence of doors being kicked from inside, no glass broken outward, and no bodies in postures suggesting attempts to crawl toward windows or exits. The bodies were concentrated in the front of the cab, indicating the full impact force focused on the front, making evasion or position changes nearly impossible. The cab deformation matched the 2008 simulation of a 20 to 30 meter free-fall trajectory, with the vehicle crushed into soft soil and snow. When analyzing individual remains positions, the forensic team observed 3 sets in the rear seat row compressed sideways, possibly due to cab tilt before the drop. 2 others in the front showed multiple bone fractures consistent with direct impact. Notably, no remains were found outside the cab or behind the cargo container, confirming all 7 people in truck number 1 died instantly upon impact without prior escape. As the excavation team expanded to the rear cargo bed, they found it buried deep and tilted to one side, suggesting the truck may have rotated slightly before hitting ground. Though the cargo bed contained no additional remains, the degree of deformation indicated extremely strong impact, consistent with an uncontrolled plunge over the edge. The forensic team collected each bone fragment, cross-referenced positions, and assigned identification codes for transport to the lab, where DNA comparison with Montana Minerals personnel records would occur. After fully examining the cab, investigators noted no traces of deliberate door opening, interior damage, or any evidence suggesting the truck stopped before falling. All details on the frame from gear shift to parking brake were deformed downward, showing no active driver intervention. The day's excavation concluded with full exposure of truck number 1's cab and front section, confirming the presence of 7 victims as originally assigned. The field report concluded that truck number 1 fell in a near vertical path, experiencing massive compressive force, causing instantaneous death for everyone in the cab. All collected data was uploaded to the Montana Cold Case system, marking the first time a portion of the 1997 missing convoy had been located and successfully excavated after nearly 2 decades existing only as hypothesis. After completing the excavation of vehicle number 1 and confirming the presence of 7 deceased bodies right inside the cabin with no signs of attempting to escape before the impact, the investigation team moved to the second area of the cluster of metal reflective signals recorded by the drone on the Highwood slope, where the 3D model showed a second large object displaced approximately more than 30 meters to the southeast. Previous simulation data had already suggested that if the convoy fell in a chained inertial manner, vehicle number times 2 located in the central position of the convoy could be pushed off in a different direction from vehicle number 1 when it lost control. Upon approaching the suspected point, the survey team confirmed that the surface soil layer had a structure similar to the previous excavation area. Strongly compacted soil mixed with forest ash and debris, with an abnormally high density compared to the surrounding natural soil layers. Proceeding to excavate the thin soil layer above the object, patches of oxidized metal gradually appeared, revealing the body of a heavy-duty vehicle. The most severely deformed area was the cabin. But unlike vehicle number 1, vehicle number 2 had rotated and tilted about 30 degrees before hitting the ground, clearly evident in the cabin roof being crushed diagonally to the left rather than straight down. This matched the 2008 simulation, which indicated that vehicle number 2, carrying the heaviest load, could have spun when impacting the edge of the slope before falling to its final position. As soon as the cabin became clearly visible, the excavation team began checking the vehicle doors. Both front doors were sealed shut, with no signs of being forced from inside or outside. The compressive force from the fall had deformed the door frames, creating wedged angles that made them impossible to open, even if the victims had tried. Similar to vehicle number 1, there were no traces of glass being pushed out in a direction indicating escape from inside the cabin. Upon accessing the cabin interior, the investigation team discovered the driver's body slumped over the steering wheel in the driver's seat. The chest and leg bones were fractured at multiple points, consistent with massive and sudden impact force when the cabin slammed into the ground. The forensic investigator confirmed these were injuries occurring exactly at the moment of impact, not prior wounds. Immediately behind the driver's and passenger seats was the area designated for 4 accompanying personnel. This section of the cabin was compressed more severely than in vehicle number 1 due to the rotational direction during the fall, concentrating the impact force on one side. 4 sets of remains were found in this area, all pinned between the seat frames and the door panels, indicating none of them had moved from their positions before the impact. However, when the investigators expanded the excavation to the cargo bed area behind the cabin, they discovered 3 additional sets of remains in unusual positions, 2 at the edge of the cargo bed and 1 wedged between 2 container support frames. The presence of bodies in the cargo bed was not unusual, as vehicle number 2 typically carried multiple personnel responsible for inspecting cargo. However, the key difference lay in the bone condition of 2 out of the 3 sets of remains. As the forensic team cleaned the soil adhering to the bones to assess injuries, they discovered that 2 sets exhibited trauma signs inconsistent with the impact mechanism of the fall. These injuries included horizontal rib fractures and skull depressions that appeared before the bodies endured the massive impact force from the accident. The degree of cracking and shattering of the bones, along with indentations in areas covered by soft tissue, indicated these were pre-impact injuries, meaning the victims had been subjected to force before the vehicle plummeted into the ravine. This was entirely different from the remaining bodies, where all wounds aligned with the fall trajectory and compressive forces caused by the accident. Noting the clear discrepancy, the forensic team documented the suspicious marks on the skulls of the 2 bodies. The frontal bone had arc-shaped indentations consistent with the edge of a hard, fine, marrow object. Additionally, the jawbone of one body showed cracking from left to right, a type of injury commonly seen when a victim is struck in the face while immobile or before losing balance. These details could not have come from the fall impact, as the accident's force direction was downward and forward into the cabin, not producing lateral effects like these wounds. The investigators immediately concluded that 2 of the 8 victims on vehicle number 2 had been subjected to force before the accident occurred. This was the first time since the county lost contact with the convoy in 1997 that injury signs inconsistent with the accident had been recorded. The emergence of pre-impact injuries raised suspicions of criminal elements, something that had been ruled out in the initial investigation phase due to a complete lack of clues. As the forensic team continued analyzing the remaining skeletons, they confirmed that the other 6 victims showed no abnormal pre-impact trauma signs. Bones fractured in directions consistent with the fall force and forward impact, with no horizontal cracks or localized depressions like the 2 cases. This reinforced a suspicion that pre-impact injuries occurred only to a small group in vehicle number 2, unrelated to the entire convoy. Upon fully excavating the cargo bed, the technical team found several personal items trapped in the folds of deformed metal gloves, fabric scraps, and small tools belonging to the cargo inspection team. There were no signs of items indicating a struggle in the cargo bed area itself, but this did not rule out the possibility of injuries occurring earlier, perhaps when the convoy was stopped or moving before losing control. At the end of the excavation day, the field report recorded a total of 8 sets of remains in vehicle number 2, matching the assigned personnel list. 2 of them bore signs of pre-impact injuries, the first evidence suggesting force had been applied before the vehicle fell, and potentially the key to unlocking criminal suspicions that could not be determined in the nearly 2 decades prior. This information was immediately entered into the Montana cold case system, along with all data from vehicle number 1, preparing for the deeper analysis phase. After 2 consecutive days of excavation and confirming that both vehicle number 1 and vehicle number 2 contain the full number of victims according to the initial transport assignment list, with vehicle number 2 having 2 bodies with pre-impact injuries, opening up an entirely new suspicion. The investigation team continued expanding the survey scope to the 3rd metal reflective point recorded by the drone in the compacted soil cluster at the eastern base of the slope, approximately nearly 50 meters down the natural slope from vehicle number 2's position. This was assessed as the final object in the group of detected reflective signals, most likely vehicle number 3, the last vehicle in the missing convoy. Upon approaching the area, the survey team noted that the soil layer covering object number 3 was thicker than the previous 2 sites. The reason was explained by the terrain wind model showing this area lay in a depression where snow and debris were more easily swept down and accumulated over the nearly 2 decades since the 1997 event. Initial soil removal took more time, but once the first metal patches emerged, the investigation team immediately recognized the reflective structure matching the large cargo bed of the transport convoy. The cabin appeared several hours later during expanded digging, buried deeper than the cabins of the previous 2 vehicles. The cabin deformation level of vehicle number 3 was less than vehicle number 3 was less than vehicle number 2, but greater than vehicle number 1, suggesting the vehicle may have fallen last in the chained impact sequence or at a slightly lower speed due to reduced inertia after the first 2 vehicles impacted. Once the cabin was exposed enough for interior observation, the excavation team discovered 4 sets of remains in positions corresponding to the driver's seat, passenger seat, and 2 rear cabin seats. The bone structures and positions of the 4 bodies all prove they died instantly upon vehicle impact with the ground, with no signs of position shift before the fall. However, the most important point was that after fully excavating the cabin, the investigation team began checking the rear cargo bed where the remaining 6 personnel assigned to vehicle number 3 were listed in the transport records. Unlike vehicle number 2, vehicle number 3's cargo bed had not rotated much but was sunk deeper into the soil, requiring more time to expand. Once the soil was cleared, the next 6 sets of remains were discovered severely compressed into the cargo bed's support frames. Thus, vehicle number 3 contained a total of 10 bodies, exactly matching the personnel assigned per Montana Minerals transport records. The injuries of the 10 bodies in vehicle number 3 were entirely consistent with freefall mechanism and strong upward impact force, with no signs of pre-impact injuries like the 2 cases in vehicle number 2. The forensic team confirmed all 10 victims in vehicle number 3 died from multiple traumas corresponding to the fall force, with no deviations in fracture directions or localized depressions from other origins. When the investigation team compiled the body count from all 3 excavation sites, 7 from vehicle number 1, 8 from vehicle number 2, and 10 from vehicle number 2, and 10 from vehicle number 3, the total number of bodies recovered was 19, equaling the personnel count except for one single individual, Supervisor Calvin Raleigh. This was the most critical turning point since the incident occurred, as up to the point vehicle number 3 was fully excavated, all analyses and hypotheses over nearly 2 decades had treated Raleigh as one of the 20 victims. The failure to discover Raleigh's body in any cabin or cargo bed, while all others were confirmed by position, bone structure, and personal items, immediately shifted the investigation team's analysis direction. Raleigh was not present in vehicle number 1's cabin, where he might have sat if overseeing the route. He was also not among the 8 bodies in vehicle number 2, the vehicle tasked with carrying most of the cargo needing supervision. And of course, there were no signs he was in vehicle number 3, where the bodies fully matched the authenticated 1997 Montana Minerals transport assignment list. The established positions of the 19 victims' bodies fully matched the original list, making any counting oversight possibility impossible. The forensic team cross-checked the original victim list in the records and confirmed Raleigh as the only one not found at the scene. Upon updating this information in the excavation minutes, Sheriff Judith Basin immediately marked the case as shifting to potential survivor left the scene status, something never considered in prior investigation phases. The absence of Raleigh's body from all 3 vehicles led to the major question. At the moment the 3 vehicles fell into the ravine, where was Raleigh? Had he exited the cabin before the accident, or was he not on any vehicle when the convoy fell? Coinciding with this, the fact that vehicle number 2 had 2 bodies with pre-impact injuries further heightened suspicions of an incident occurring before the convoy plummeted. And Raleigh, the only one completely missing from the scene, became the focal point for all subsequent analysis directions. To rule out the possibility of Raleigh's body being ejected from the vehicle during the fall, the survey team further expanded the soil areas around the 3 excavation points and checked the entire slope surface from vehicle number 3 down to the valley floor. However, no scattered bone fragments, personal items, slide marks, or any objects matching human remains characteristics were found. The complete absence of any traces related to Raleigh led the investigation team, for the first time in nearly 2 decades, to consider the possibility that he was the convoy's sole survivor, a hypothesis completely contrary to all assessments in the initial 1997 to 1998 investigation. The group's end-of-day excavation report stated, "A total of 19 bodies have been recovered, all matching the personnel assignment list. Calvin Raleigh's body is not in the 3 excavated vehicles. The only remaining possibility, Raleigh did not die in the impact." With this conclusion, the entire official investigation direction shifted to determining how Raleigh left the convoy, at what point, and whether the pre-impact injuries on 2 victims and vehicle number 2 were related to his absence. Immediately after confirming a total of 19 bodies recovered from the 3 vehicles and affirming that Supervisor Calvin Raleigh was not in any cabin or cargo bed, Sheriff Judith Basin shifted the entire team to crime scene processing mode, prioritizing the search for traces leaving the crash area rather than focusing solely on fixed objects. Based on experience investigating major terrain accidents, the investigation team expanded and gridded the excavation area with evenly spaced survey cells, then used handheld surface LiDAR scanners to detect top-layer soil deformations. Searching for traces on ground altered by forest fire made the task complex, but the fire also had an advantage. It burned away most surface vegetation, exposing many previously covered soil positions. Within a few hours of analysis, a technician discovered a series of small depressions on the ground surface, located downwind to the northeast from vehicle number 2-3's position, about 14 meters from the cabin. These depressions were uneven in depth and not uniform, but repeated at intervals relatively consistent with human gait. The investigation team used scaled measuring tools to determine the distances between marks and confirmed they fell in the 62-67 centimeter range, corresponding to the stride of an average height male from 5'8" to 5'11", matching Raleigh's height information in the Montana Minerals Transport Personnel file. When examined with high-resolution cameras, some depressions had slightly curved edges, forming a characteristic U-shape typical of large rubber sole boots. The traces were not continuous due to charred soil and strong post-fire winds, but the series followed a curved path toward the lower slope section leading to the eastern prairie. The investigation team could not obtain intact boot prints because the burned soil distorted the impressions, but the edge shapes were sufficient to classify them as heavy-duty industrial boots, the same type issued to the convoy per Montana Minerals Transport's catalog. While following this trace series closer, the investigation team collected the first item of forensic value since excavation began, an industrial glove partially buried in the ash soil layer, about 4 meters from the first footprint. The glove was thick rubber material used for cargo handling, resistant to oil and high friction. Using forceps to avoid DNA contamination, the forensic team immediately noted that the glove's inner surface still retained some dried skin cells and sweat solidified into a thin layer due to dry weather. The evidence was bagged and rushed to the Cold Case Montana lab in Great Falls for DNA analysis. While awaiting results, the investigation team continued expanding the search along the trace direction. About 20 meters from the glove position, a series of small rocks showed abnormal displacement indicating something had struck them. Notably, a flat rock approximately 40 by 50 centimeters had a light slide mark downward along the slope, consistent with a person moving while off balance or exhausted. The displacement did not point toward the vehicle crash area, but toward a natural opening leading down to lower grasslands with flatter terrain. The survey team marked everything per criminal scene protocol, prioritizing preservation as long as possible to avoid distorting the presumed Raleigh's movement model. While the field team continued collecting data, the glove DNA results were transmitted to the sheriff's office. Analysis showed the biological material inside the glove matched perfectly with Raleigh's stored state DNA sample. This was the first forensic evidence confirming that Raleigh not only did not die at the vehicle impact site, but also left the area on his own feet. Raleigh's DNA appearing in the discarded glove, not far from the crash site, strongly reinforced the hypothesis that he survived the impact at a moment when everyone else died instantly upon ground contact. Deeper glove surface analysis also revealed small tears on the backhand area, consistent with scratches from using hands to grasp rocks or bushes in rugged terrain climbing or movement. Another key detail was that the soil adhering to the glove's outer surface belonged to the topsoil layer, not the deeper mineral-mixed soil on the slope where vehicles fell. This indicated Raleigh left the crash area, and the glove dropped during movement rather than being carried down with the vehicle during the fall. When the investigation team used a low-flying drone to scan the northeast terrain, the direction the footprint series led, the camera detected a thin soil strip with unusual slide patterns running parallel to the footprint depressions. The slide strip was about 15 centimeters wide and 1 to 2 centimeters deep, resembling a light object drag or a person using something as support while moving. Some segments had small soil breaks, suggesting Raleigh leaned on a hard object, possibly a wooden stick or charred tree trunk, for movement support. Combining the footprints, slide strip, and glove position, the investigation team built a departure trajectory model. This trajectory showed Raleigh moving in a curved path downward to lower areas, avoiding steep drops and heading toward flat eastern land where pre-fire vegetation was denser and could provide short-term shelter. No traces indicated Raleigh returned to the crash area or headed west, more complex terrain harder to navigate if injured. Scene analysis also showed Raleigh did not run, but took unstable steps, evident from varying distances between depressions. Some unusually deep footprints suggested he favored one leg more, indicating possible injury or minor trauma after the impact. From the scene traces, the sheriff concluded Raleigh survived the vehicle crash, left the impact site on foot, dropped the glove during movement, and continued toward the eastern prairie area. This was the first forensic evidence showing Raleigh did not die with a 1997 convoy, opening an entirely new investigation direction, tracing the survivor who vanished from the scene nearly 2 decades earlier. Immediately after, the forensic analysis of the scene confirmed that Raleigh had left the vehicle crash area on his own feet, and the investigation direction shifted to determining what had occurred. Right before the convoy lost control, the investigation team refocused on reviewing physical evidence in the 3 vehicle cabins, particularly small items lodged deep in metal crevices or tightly compressed storage compartments that the excavation teams had not opened during the initial phase. When the debris around the central control console area of cabin number 2 was partially cleared, a forensic technician discovered a leather object wedged tightly between the dashboard and the steel frame. The object was extracted using long forceps. It initially appeared to be a softcover notebook with charred edges but many intact pages inside. After the surface was cleaned and the paper layer separated using low-pressure hot air, the investigation team confirmed this was the work log of the chief engineer of the transport convoy, the person responsible for the final technical inspection before each trip and assigned to sit in vehicle number 2 according to the duty roster. This was the first document recording internal convoy information prior to the disappearance and was immediately considered key evidence. As Montana cold case personnel began reading and digitizing the contents, a series of unusual details emerged, completely altering the picture that had been assumed for nearly 2 decades. The final pages of the log entered on November 11, 1997. Just 1 day before the missing transport, directly referenced conflicts between the chief engineer and supervisor Calvin Raleigh regarding the brake condition of vehicle number 2. The notations clearly stated, auxiliary brake misaligned, does not meet operational standards. Accompanied by the note, recommended stopping the vehicle for replacement, but Raleigh refused due to schedule pressure. Another line, scrawled hastily and underlined, stated Raleigh said no delays allowed. Cargo must arrive on time. This was the first evidence confirming that Raleigh had deliberately ignored a technical recommendation and pressured the convoy to proceed despite knowing vehicle number 2 risked brake failure. Investigators continued reading earlier pages and discovered additional notes about tense atmosphere within the transport team. One page recorded, driver crew unhappy, disagreed with route change. Raleigh said main route iced over, wanted to try Highwood Bench. Drivers doubted tire grip there. This was particularly significant because the Highwood Bench route was the alternate mentioned in a 2001 cold case report, where the heaviest blizzard that night was confirmed to cover. If the log is accurate, Raleigh not only ignored technical warnings but also deliberately directed the convoy into the most dangerous blizzard area. Another page in the log, written more briefly but clearly, noted, argument broke out at Geyser. Some guys didn't want route change. Raleigh got angry. This detail matched the vague statement from the Geyser gas station employee who recalled a loud exchange but could not determine its severity. The chief engineer's log now confirmed the argument directly concerned the route change decision before the disappearance. However, the most striking part of the notebook was on the last readable page, where a short, hastily written entry mentioned concerns about 2 people in vehicle number 2. The text read, They said Raleigh had his own plan. One said he saw him arguing with someone before departure. Not clear what, but not minor. Though no names were given, the log indicated internal conflicts within the convoy, and at least 2 personnel on vehicle number 2 had suspicions about Raleigh's behavior right before the trip. This eerily matched the prior forensic findings. The 2 bodies on vehicle number 2 had pre-impact injuries inconsistent with crash mechanics. The log increased the likelihood that direct conflict occurred between Raleigh and these 2 individuals before the convoy fell. Another detail recorded in the log unclear when during the day opened a special investigative direction. Raleigh holding strange map. Not like company map. Route marked in red pen, not standard. This map was not found in cabin 1, 2, or 3, and its presence in Raleigh's hands heightened suspicion he had led the convoy off the approved route. When the investigation team analyzed the log contents overall, they noted 4 key points. 1. Raleigh deliberately ignored the chief engineer's technical warning. 2. Raleigh forced route change despite driver disagreement. 3. Serious internal argument existed at Geyser. Crate. 2 personnel on vehicle number 2 had suspected Raleigh and later were the ones with pre-impact injuries. The combination of the chief engineer's log and forensic conclusions from vehicle number 2 made it impossible for the team to continue viewing the incident as a pure accident. The log was formally entered into the Montana cold case system with the evaluation note, high-value evidence, indicating motive and intentional conduct related to Raleigh. In the context of no Raleigh body found in any vehicle and footprints at the scene showing he left the area after the incident, the notebook became the critical piece connecting disparate facts. Raleigh was not only the sole survivor, but likely actively led the convoy into the dangerous route, had conflict with 2 personnel on vehicle number 2, and left the scene after the crash occurred. It was from this turning point that the investigation direction had to expand beyond the crash site. The recovery of the chief engineer's log, combined with confirmation of pre-impact injuries on 2 victims in vehicle number 2, prompted the team to re-examine all financial records of Montana Minerals. Transport especially documents the 2005 cold case review had assessed as irregular but insufficient for conclusion. This time, the context had fundamentally changed. Raleigh was no longer viewed as one of the missing victims, but as a directly involved subject, as new evidence showed he controlled or handover processes, deliberately ignored technical warnings, forced the convoy route change, and had serious internal conflicts just hours before the entire convoy vanished. A financial investigation subunit was mobilized to re-examine all old data, from ore handover forms, mining transport storage figures to the company payroll system. When cross-referencing 1997 data, the team discovered that in October and early November, the period immediately before the missing shipment, there were repeated discrepancies between ore quantities leaving the Townsend mine and quantities recorded upon arrival at Great Falls. These figures had previously been attributed to natural loss, but in the current context, the recurring cyclical discrepancy pattern led investigators to suspect the system may have been intentionally manipulated. Personnel records showed Raleigh was the only individual signing both stages, signing receipt at the mine and signing handover at the destination. These absolutely independent signatures, without cross-verification from a second person, created a gap easily exploitable if someone wanted to manipulate transport figures. When the team delved into Raleigh's personal financial statements, they found that although his lifestyle showed no major changes, small but unusually recurring deposits appeared in his account throughout the 6 months before the disappearance. Each deposit ranged from $400 to $900, not enough to draw attention in 1997, but when linked as a series, they exhibited the pattern of under-the-table payments or benefits from splitting a larger sum to avoid oversight. Financial investigators concluded Raleigh very likely participated in a small-scale but prolonged ore fraud scheme by deliberately adjusting volume figures, so discrepancies between mine departure and plant arrival went undetected. During cross-checking, a crucial detail emerged. The 2 victims with pre-impact injuries on vehicle number 2, James Hartley and Victor Laird, were both personnel who had previously handled ore quality control on prior shipments. Company internal records showed these 2 had submitted 3 irregularity reports in 1997 regarding cargo weight not matching extraction figures. These reports were dismissed by mid-level management as minor discrepancies within acceptable limits, but the timing of their concerns coinciding with the discrepancy pattern led the team to suspect they may have pressured or confronted Raleigh. As investigators dug deeper, They discovered in Montana minerals transport payroll records that Hartley and Laird had been assigned random checks of ore handover forms in September and October 1997. This matched the 2 months with the highest discrepancy levels in transport data. The chief engineer's log also noted that 2 people in vehicle number 2 expressed suspicion about Raleigh right before the incident. When piecing details together, quality control roles, pre-impact injuries, and internal conflict noted in the log, the investigation team was nearly certain Hartley and Laird confronted Raleigh during the final trip. Another detail emerged when the forensics lab analyzed shoes and protective gear recovered from vehicle number 2. Both Hartley and Laird showed traces of slope soil, but their bone fractures were inconsistent with fall force and consistent with direct blows from behind the head and right side of the face. This added weight to the hypothesis they were attacked by Raleigh before the vehicle fell. The clearest motive: they discovered Raleigh's involvement in ore fraud and may have threatened to report it to the company. When the team further analyzed the chief engineer's log, they noted the entry. They said Raleigh had his own plan, could relate to him attempting to cover the fraud by routing the convoy onto the alternate path where severe weather would make any irregularities attributable to unavoidable accident. The alignment between the route Raleigh wanted and the heaviest blizzard area on the night of November 12, 1997 led investigators to suspect he may have exploited environmental conditions to obscure the true cause. When correlating timing of unusual deposits in Raleigh's account with discrepant shipments, the team found they matched in 6 consecutive instances. Each time discrepancy exceeded 80 pounds, a small deposit appeared in Raleigh's account within 72 hours. This chain of coincidences was strong enough to rule out randomness. Preliminary financial team conclusion: Raleigh played a central role in a small-scale but prolonged ore fraud pattern. Employees Hartley and Laird discovered this and likely confronted Raleigh directly during the final transport. The chief engineer's log contents, combined with pre-impact injuries on the 2 victims, strengthened the likelihood of conflict inside vehicle number 2 cabin before the convoy fell. When combining all financial data, log, injury locations, and internal communication patterns, the investigation team concluded Raleigh had a clear financial motive to eliminate those threatening him. This was the first time since 1997 that a criminal motive linked to Raleigh was established on solid evidence, forcing the entire investigation direction to shift toward locating the sole survivor, not because he was missing, but because he may be the only remaining perpetrator. After the financial data and evidence from the chief engineer's log indicated Raleigh likely had motive to lead the convoy off the standard route and force a path change, the Montana Cold Case team decided to deploy a comprehensive 3D forensic simulation to test whether the convoy could have fallen into the ravine cluster where the 3 vehicles were found if it had remained on the approved Townsend Town belt route. The simulation's objective was to determine accident feasibility in 2 scenarios. 1. The convoy stayed on the standard route and suffered a sudden failure causing it to veer off. Or 2. The convoy deviated to the alternate high wood bench route and crashed exactly where the 3 vehicles were recovered. Distinguishing these possibilities was key to establishing Raleigh's role, because if the crash could only occur after leaving the route, it bolstered the theory that Raleigh intentionally directed the convoy into danger to conceal internal conflicts or fraud. To conduct a simulation, the technical team used 2015 terrain data exposed partly by forest fires combined with digitized 1997 GIS data, creating an accurate 3D terrain model of the entire area from the geyser gas station to the vehicle fall location. For the first time since the convoy vanished, the reconstruction could replicate both the standard and alternate routes, including slope grades, curve angles, road curvature, drainage ditches, lightly eroded mountain slopes, and natural gullies. The team input into the simulation software the weight of the 3 trucks per Montana minerals transport specs, each carrying over 10,000 pounds of manganese ore plus vehicle tare weight exceeding 14,000 pounds. Cabins, chassis, center of gravity, and brake systems were modeled accurately to 1997 company technical records, including vehicle number 2's misaligned auxiliary brake per the chief engineer's note. When running the standard Townsend Dest Molt route simulation, the software recreated impact forces, inertia, and skid potential under blizzard conditions. The result revealed one critical finding. On the standard route, no point had terrain steep or curved enough to cause the convoy to fall exactly where recovered, even with total brake failure. Curves near Rainsford and Belt had natural barriers or shallow ditches, insufficient to engulf 3 heavy vehicles. Fall force in the standard route simulation produced trajectories mismatched with depth, rotation direction, and distribution of the three vehicles down the highwood slope. This made the likelihood of the convoy being on the standard route at the time of fall nearly zero. Next, the team simulated the alternate route the chief engineer's log noted Raleigh wanted to use because the main route was iced over. The highwood bench route was modeled with high structural accuracy, recreating all 4.7 miles of narrow dirt road, unstable surface, sharp blind curves obscured by mountain slopes, and strong crosswind points, especially after the intersection several miles from Geyser. When simulating the convoy on this exact alternate route, results immediately changed, approximately 300 to 350 meters west of where vehicle number 1 was excavated. The alternate route ran along a ridge with 38-42-degree slope, steep enough for a vehicle to be pulled off the road when losing control under weak braking. When simulating brake failure for vehicle number 2 with its faulty auxiliary system, the software showed vehicle number 2's pull toward the slope would push vehicle number 1 off course, while vehicle number 3 would follow inertia without braking in time. The three-vehicle fall trajectory in the simulation matched almost perfectly with actual recovered positions. Vehicle number 1 fell first and straight along the axis. Vehicle number 2 spun sharply left before impact, and vehicle number 3 fell slower but deeper into the terrain depression. Burial depth, cabin rotation direction, and cargo bed positions of all three vehicles matched significantly with 2015 field data. The simulation also showed that for the three vehicles to fall down the highwood slope in that manner, the convoy necessarily deviated from the standard route and entered highwood bench for at least 1.9 miles. No shortcut or secondary intersection from the standard route led to the ravine where vehicles were found. This completely ruled out the convoy simply skidding off randomly. The simulation segment also allowed investigators to analyze timing of pre-impact injuries on the two victims in vehicle number 2. When modeling conflict inside vehicle number 2 cabin while stopped or moving slowly, the software showed sufficient cabin space to produce injury patterns matching Hartley and Laird, especially jaw and skull impacts from the right consistent with Raleigh's position if the two sat behind the passenger seat. Subsequent vehicle number 2 trajectory if the driver lost control for seconds due to conflict led to veering off exactly as reconstructed. When comparing time from route deviation to fall point, the software calculated the convoy traveled approximately 30 to 38 minutes from leaving Geyser at 20,014, matching the CB radio loss of contact window. This aligned perfectly with the actual timeline, proving the convoy left the standard route immediately after radio silence. Finally, the 3D forensic simulation concluded there was no scenario in which the convoy could fall into the exact recovered location if following the standard Townsend-Nador belt route. The accident could only occur if the convoy entered the alternate highwood bench route, the path the chief engineer's log recorded. Raleigh insisted on using. The simulation results were entered into the official case file, marking a major turning point. The crash location was not random, but the direct consequence of Raleigh actively leading the convoy off the approved route. After the 3D forensic simulation concluded that the convoy could only have fallen to the exact location where it was found if it deviated from the standard route and entered the highwood bench route in the direction of Raleigh Point under duress. The Montana cold case team officially shifted its focus to tracing Raleigh, with the determination that he not only survived the accident, but may have actively concealed his whereabouts for nearly 2 decades. The first line of investigation concentrated on determining whether Raleigh received assistance from someone after leaving the crash site area. Footprints and slide marks found in Section 24 indicated that Raleigh had moved northeast, where the terrain is more open and there are numerous old trails connecting to secondary road systems leading out of the highwood foothills. Drones continued scanning along the direction of the footprints and detected multiple sections of compressed soil, characteristic of an injured or exhausted person. But the traces quickly disappeared in an area with new vegetation growth following a forest fire, making it impossible to track his subsequent movement. Therefore, the investigation team shifted to collecting data on any man who appeared in the Idaho, Wyoming, Montana region between late 1997 and early 1998, with matching characteristics: male, approximately 40 to 45 years old, 5'9" tall, with injuries to the rib area or minor head trauma, and a history of manual labor or long-haul trucking. The breakthrough event occurred when an investigator reviewed emergency medical records at small county hospitals in Idaho. A line of inquiry opened because Raleigh may have crossed the highwood foothills and continued traveling along old trucking routes to central Idaho. While screening records at a small hospital in Lemhi County, the investigator discovered an unusual medical file. November 19, 1997, just 7 days after the convoy disappeared. A man using the name Ellie Carter was admitted in a state of severe dehydration, with multiple abrasions on his body and a right rib injury from impact with a hard object. According to the medical record, the man carried no valid identification, only presenting a crumpled ID card with vague information and no social security number. Hospital staff noted that Carter had the appearance of a long-haul worker, gave inconsistent statements, and consistently avoided contact with personnel. The attending physician added a short but significant note. Patient refuses to provide a fixed address. Reported details are inconsistent. This suspiciously matched the profile of someone attempting to conceal their identity. When the investigation team compared a composite sketch of Raleigh with the physical description of Ellie Carter, they found numerous matches: height, estimated weight, hair color, and an old scar under the left jaw, a feature documented in Montana minerals records, but rarely noted by hospitals unless a thorough examination was conducted. The investigator immediately requested retrieval of Ellie Carter's fingerprint records, but the 1997 hospital had not taken fingerprints since there was no criminal reason to do so. However, the hospital had retained blood-stained gauze after treating the patient's rib injury, as old regulations allowed samples to be kept for 15 years for internal quality purposes. This sample had been digitized and placed in cold storage in 2012, coincidentally preserved until 2015. When DNA analysis was performed on the blood from this sample and compared to Raleigh's DNA sample stored in state records prior to 1997, the results confirmed a 100% match. This was the first forensic evidence proving that Raleigh not only survived but also appeared in Idaho just 7 days after the convoy crash. The investigation team continued querying the medical history of Ellie Carter and discovered that he left the hospital after only 3 days of treatment, refusing any form of financial assistance and not using a vehicle or any transportation when departing. A nurse noted that he walked out of the hospital carrying a small backpack and a slip of paper with a follow-up appointment time, but he never returned. From this point, tracing Ellie Carter became significantly more difficult. There were no bank invoices, no employment records, no permanent address, and no social security number matching the name. However, expanding the investigation to records of low-cost lodging and seasonal labor camps uncovered an additional chain of clues. In December 1997, a man using the name E.I. Carter appeared in the ledger of a labor camp in Idaho Falls, staying 2 nights before leaving. The camp manager described him as quiet, avoiding eye contact, appearing injured near the ribs, consistent with the hospital record. 1 month later, traces of E.E. Carter surfaced again in a logging area in Salmon Chalaos, when a truck driver reported to the operator that a strange man hitched a ride to the logging camp. The driver described him as resembling an old trucking worker who seemed very familiar with heavy vehicles. When comparing this description to Raleigh, the investigation team noted that all details matched. However, no official records after January 1998 documented the appearance of Ellie Carter in Idaho or any neighboring state. This led the investigation team to hypothesize that Raleigh may have deliberately changed his name multiple times, moving through seasonal labor and leaving no financial or administrative trace. Additional evidence supporting this hypothesis emerged when the team examined Idaho Department of Motor Vehicles applications for ID cards from 1998 to 2000. They found 6 unsuccessful ID registration files due to insufficient proof of identity, all using the names Ely, Elias, or E. Carter, and with identifying features closely resembling Raleigh's. His attempts to obtain legal documents but failing indicated that Raleigh intentionally sought to reestablish an identity, but lacked the data to legitimize it. The conclusion from this entire analysis was entered into the official file. Raleigh not only survived the accident, but also traveled through Idaho in the final months of 1997. Early 1998, under the false name Ellie Carter, received treatment for post-accident injuries, used invalid identification, and left DNA evidence at the hospital. This was the first chain of evidence proving Raleigh actively concealed his whereabouts, completely ruling out the possibility that he was a victim, and further strengthening the hypothesis that he was evading criminal responsibility related to the deaths of the remaining 19 people in the convoy. After verifying that Raleigh's DNA matched the sample obtained from the Idaho hospital and the chain of data regarding the false identity, Ellie Carter proved he survived, left the scene, and actively concealed his whereabouts for many months after the accident. The Montana Cold Case team compiled all reinvestigation data from 2014 to 2015 to assess Raleigh's degree of involvement in the event that caused the deaths of 19 others, while preparing legal grounds to request a state-level arrest warrant. The compilation began with a forensic overview from the Highwood site, 3 trucks found at 3 different locations but within a slope range with a unified fall axis. Deformation analysis of all 3 cabins showed that all impact forces occurred at the moment the vehicles fell into the ravine, with no signs of external interference after the accident. The positions of bodies in trucks 1 and 3 confirmed all victims died instantly. Truck 2 alone had 2 victims with pre-impact injuries, characterized by bone fractures and dents inconsistent with fall forces, raising suspicions of conflict occurring before the accident. Footprints and slide marks at the scene proved Raleigh exited the cabin, or possibly was not in the cabin when the vehicles fell and moved away from the crash area northeast. While there were no signs anyone else left the scene. This evidence, combined with Raleigh's DNA on gloves left behind, reinforced the determination that Raleigh was the sole survivor and actively fled the scene. Next, the investigation team included in the report indirect physical evidence related to motive. The chief engineer's log confirmed Raleigh refused to repair the brakes on Truck 2 despite technical recommendations, forced the convoy to proceed in blizzard conditions despite driver objections, and pursued the goal of switching to the Highwood bench route, the route that 3D forensics proved was the only one leading to the 3 crash locations. The log also recorded serious internal conflicts between Raleigh and 2 inventory inspectors, Hartley and Laird, the 2 victims who coincidentally had pre-impact injuries. The financial report from the 2005 Cold Case Review, when re-evaluated in the current context, showed Raleigh had complete control over the ore handover process, at recurring small unusual amounts in his personal account, and was the only person able to manipulate ore receipt figures. When the 2 inspectors objected or threatened to report misconduct, Raleigh had a clear motive to silence them. The 3D forensic simulation confirmed the accident could only occur if Raleigh deliberately led the convoy off the standard route into the most dangerous storm area. At the simulated loss of control due to conflict in Truck 2 cabin point, the convoy's fall trajectory matched 90 to 95% of real site data, while simulations of the standard route produced no matching results. Thus, technical, forensic, and terrain analyses all indicated the accident was not a random event or purely weather-related, but a direct consequence of Raleigh forcing the route change despite technical warnings and driver objections. Next, the team included in the compilation the identity tracing section. Idaho hospital data proved Raleigh received treatment for injuries consistent with a high fall but not fatal. His provision of the false name Ellie Carter, refusal of financial assistance, walking out of the hospital, and appearances in low-cost labor camps over 2 months showed this was not amnesia or post-accident panic, but a systematic effort to avoid identification. The 6 failed Idaho DMV ID registrations, all with Carter E. Carter, or similar variants, reinforced the determination that Raleigh deliberately attempted to establish a new identity but lacked documents to legalize it. His complete lack of contact with family, company, or any organization after surviving contrary to typical accident victim behavior was a key indicator proving he was evading rather than suffering memory loss or post-trauma confusion. Comparing all data, the investigation team concluded Raleigh had motive, preparatory behavior, opportunity to commit the act, concealment behavior, and prolonged evasion behavior. The reinvestigation compilation concluded clearly Raleigh not only survived, but was directly involved in the cause leading to the event that killed 19 people, including the unauthorized route change decision, ignoring technical warnings, and the possibility of injuring 2 personnel before the vehicles fell. Accordingly, the Montana Cold Case team formally recommended that the state prosecutor's office issue an arrest warrant for Calvin Raleigh, with preliminary charges including high-degree manslaughter, negligent homicide, felony tampering, and fleeing after causing death. This was the first time since 1997 that the case was determined to no longer be a mysterious accident but a criminal event with a clear suspect. After the state-level arrest warrant was approved, Calvin Raleigh's wanted file was immediately transferred to the U.S. Marshal Service because the suspect had used false identities for many years and was likely continuing to evade across state lines. A federal warrant was issued for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, allowing deployment of federal resources to search for Raleigh in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and the entire corridor of freelance labor areas where undocumented individuals often travel. Using data from the Lemhi County Hospital records and low-cost labor camps, The U.S. Marshals team established a predicted movement model based on points where Raleigh had appeared. He tended to choose small towns, avoid crowded urban areas, and often stay in temporary lodgings, repair warehouses, or highway motels. After analyzing Raleigh's movement pattern from 1997 to 1998, combined with DMV information on 6 failed ID attempts, the pursuit team narrowed the search area to 3 cities with the highest match probability: Salmon, Orofino, and Lewiston, Idaho, where seasonal winter labor networks were denser and Raleigh could survive more easily without legal documents. By late October 2015, a Marshals agent discovered a man using the name Ernest Carter on the rental list of a low-cost boarding house in Lewiston. The landlord's description matched Raleigh almost perfectly. Male, around 60, sturdy build, slightly heavy gait on the right leg, quiet, with a habit of stepping back when others approached. The name Ernest Carter was also a logical variant of the previous alias Ellie Carter, making the Marshals determine this was the most reliable lead since the pursuit began. An elite Marshals team was deployed to Lewiston, conducting continuous surveillance of the boarding house for 3 days, recording Raleigh's times leaving the room, daily habits, contact points, and routes used. Hidden cameras showed Raleigh living completely isolated, not interacting with anyone, paying for items in cash, and avoiding prolonged contact. Notably, Raleigh still wore old-style high-top industrial boots, very similar to the type issued by Montana Minerals in the 1990s, and his limping gait reflected old rib injuries from the Highwood accident. Once observational data was sufficiently strong, the Marshals coordinated with Lewiston police to develop an arrest plan inside the boarding house to minimize the risk of Raleigh fleeing or injuring others. At 5 a.m. on November 2, 2015, the task force approached the door of room 208, the room Raleigh had rented for the past 2 months, and used a loudspeaker to demand the suspect open the door. There was no response, and after 3 requests per protocol, a specialized entry team breached the lock with hydraulic tools. Raleigh was found in the corner of the room, sitting against the wall, hands on his thighs, no weapons. He attempted to say nothing, only shaking his head and closing his eyes when agents asked him to confirm his name. Although he appeared non-resistant, the Marshals team still proceeded with federal standard restraint, handcuffing him and reading his Miranda rights. As he was led to the transport vehicle, Raleigh showed no violent reaction, only bowing his head as if he knew this day would come. After bringing Raleigh to the station, the Marshals and Lewiston police began searching room 208 under an approved warrant. The evidence recovered in the room was not surprising but consisted of important pieces confirming Raleigh's long-term flight behavior. The first item was a pair of high-top industrial boots, heavily worn at the front sole and stained with red soil, the type found at Highwood Bench. Preliminary analysis showed the boot model matched those issued to the Montana Minerals transport convoy in 1997, and the tear patterns on the boot edges matched the tear direction recorded in the Highwood site footprint analysis. The second item was a bundle of loose papers including multiple incomplete ID cards, rejected DMV forms, cut and pasted letters from other documents, and 2 sheets handwritten with the names E. Start, Carter and Ernest C., proving Raleigh had repeatedly attempted to create legal false identities but failed. Next to the fake papers were 2 small notebooks recording short entries about changing locations, avoiding crowded towns, noting seasonal labor points, and places that don't ask for papers. All of this showed Raleigh had maintained an anonymous lifestyle for many years. In another drawer, investigators found a worn heavy jacket with tears and hand-stitched repairs. On the left sleeve were 3 dark stains. A quick hemoglobin test strip confirmed these were old blood stains, potentially matching the time Raleigh was injured after leaving the 1997 crash site. Beside the jacket, the search team seized a small folding knife, a wad of cash totaling about 380 tolls, and an old Idaho map marked with symbols for labor camp routes, shortcuts, and areas avoiding heavy traffic. Investigators also found a handwritten note: "Do not return to Montana. No one can know what happened." This was not a direct confession, but a clear sign Raleigh was always aware he was the sole survivor of the 1997 event and deliberately stayed away from the accident location. In the bag Raleigh carried when arrested, the team seized additional evidence: a multi-tool knife, 4 packets of dried food, 2 sets of work clothes, and a calendar noting destinations from 2010 to 2015. This indicated Raleigh lived like a long-term drifter, moving constantly to avoid detection. Upon completing the search, all evidence was sealed and immediately sent to the Montana Cold Case Analysis Lab. Initial analysis results showed the soil on Raleigh's boots matched samples from the Highwood slope collected during excavation of trucks 2 and 3, further strengthening the direct link between Raleigh and the crash site. After evidence collection was complete, the U.S. Marshals transferred Raleigh to Nez Perce County Jail to await formal extradition to Montana. In the arrest report, Marshals noted, "Suspect remained silent throughout the process. No resistance, no identity confirmation." At this point, after 18 years on the run, Calvin Raleigh was finally in custody, closing the initial phase of a case long regarded as the greatest mystery in Montana at the end of the 20th century. The trial of Calvin Raleigh began in August 2016 at the U.S. District Court for the District of Montana, marking the final phase of the 1997 mass disappearance case, no longer classified as a mysterious accident, but now a complex criminal file built on nearly 2 decades of forensic evidence, 3D simulation data, and financial analysis. On the very first day, the federal prosecutor presented the jury with a comprehensive account, the disappearance of the convoy in 1997. The initial failed investigation due to technological limitations. The 2015 reinvestigation triggered by the discovery of compacted soil after the Highwood wildfire. The excavation of 3 trucks. The recovery of the remains of 19 victims and Raleigh's absence. Footprints leading away from the scene. DNA evidence from gloves. Hospital records in Idaho under the alias L.E. Carter. Items seized from a Lewiston motel room. The chief engineer's log. And most crucially, the 3D forensic simulation proving the convoy could only have fallen to the discovered location if it deviated from the standard route at Raleigh's direction. The entire sequence was described by the prosecution as a chain of intentional acts with motive, concealment, and deadly consequences, not a mere traffic accident. The first evidence presented was technical and forensic data from Highwood. Forensic experts explained in detail the cabin structures of the 3 trucks, body positions, fracture patterns, deformation levels, and fall trajectories. This evidence showed that all victims in trucks 1 and 3 died instantly on impact, but truck 2 had 2 bodies with pre-impact injuries, depressions in the skull and right jaw fractures, with impact directions consistent with blunt force strikes rather than downward fall forces. The expert's conclusion: the 2 victims were assaulted before the trucks went over. This raised the question of why Raleigh, who was seated in the same cab of truck 2, had no similar injuries. The jury was shown crime scene photos and 3D models from the excavation. Images of truck 2's diagonally crushed cab, combined with the positions of the 2 bodies in vulnerable postures within the confined space, indicated the conflict occurred just minutes or seconds before the vehicles lost control. Following the forensic experts, the prosecution moved to the 3D forensic simulation, considered the technical backbone of the entire case. Simulation experts reconstructed the crash using 1997-2015 terrain data, wind direction, slope angles, road slipperiness, and the auxiliary brake failure in truck 2. When simulating the convoy staying on the standard Townsend-Tanger belt route, no results matched the actual fault trajectory. But when simulating deviation onto the Highwood bench route, the exact path Raleigh forced according to the chief engineer's log, the model matched 92 to 96% with the real positions of the 3 trucks. The expert concluded in court, no accident, no matter how severe, could have taken 3 trucks to that location if the convoy remained on the main route. This could only happen if they deviated from the planned route at the direction of the person in command. All jurors sat in silence as the fall trajectory animation appeared beside the Highwood. Map 2 curved lines in red and blue highlighting the difference between the actual path and the standard route. In the third evidence segment, the prosecution focused on finances and motive. The 2005 Cold Case Review Forensic Financial Report was represented with charts showing repeated discrepancies of 80 to 120 pounds of ore over 3 consecutive months, coinciding with the periods Raleigh oversaw most load inspections. A series of $400–900 deposits into Raleigh's account, too small to raise suspicion at the time but obvious when sequenced, were also displayed. The prosecution argued that Raleigh had engaged in a pattern of small but consistent volume fraud for personal gain, and that 2 load inspectors, Hartley and Laird, had discovered it, threatening to report him, leading to the conflict described in the chief engineer's log. The fact that these 2 individuals had pre-impact injuries was a key piece. They didn't just know about Raleigh's fraud, they confronted him about it, and they were the only 2 in the convoy with injuries before the fall. After the financial segment, the prosecution presented evidence of flight, shoe prints leaving the scene, gloves with Raleigh's DNA, hospital records in Lemhi County under the alias Ellie Carter, doctor's notes on rib injuries consistent with the fall pattern, failed ID registration attempts, seized shoes, jacket, and map from the Lewiston motel room. The prosecution described Raleigh's 18 years under false identities as a pattern of deliberate evasion of the law, not confusion or post-accident amnesia. When showing photos of room 208 seized by U.S. Marshals, many jurors leaned forward to see the notebook listing towns Raleigh avoided, remote routes he used to travel, and the note, "Never return to Montana. No one must know what happened." The prosecution concluded the evidence presentation with a simple statement. He knew exactly what happened. He caused it. On the defense side, Raleigh's attorney attempted to argue that he suffered memory loss after the accident, acted on survival instinct, and that the pre-impact injuries to the two victims in Truck 2 could have come from interior collisions during initial impacts before the fall. However, forensic experts immediately rebutted. The pre-impact injuries had lateral, inconsistent impact directions impossible from the fall. The defense also argued there was no direct witness proving Raleigh assaulted the two victims. The prosecution countered with forensic principle. In a truck cab with space for only 3 people, shoulder to shoulder, 2 sustained injuries before the crash. The third did not die. The third was Raleigh. When the defense attorney moved to exclude the 3D simulation as speculative, the judge ruled it admissible as it had been validated by terrain data, physics data, and actual excavation results as sufficient standard under federal law. Finally, Raleigh was allowed to stand and speak. He said only one short sentence, with no apology or explanation. "I don't remember anything after the impact." The prosecution immediately reminded the jury that Raleigh was lucid enough to use 6 false names over 18 years, apply for IDs, work seasonal jobs, log evasion routes, and conceal his identity, completely inconsistent with amnesia. After 8 days of trial, 3 days of closing arguments, and nearly 1 full day of deliberation, the court announced the verdict. The presiding judge read each charge slowly, the courtroom silent enough to hear pages turning. The jury found Calvin Raleigh guilty of high-degree manslaughter for creating conditions leading to the deaths of 19 people. Guilty of felony assault for causing pre-impact injuries to victims Hartley and Laird. Guilty of felony tampering with federal transport routing. And guilty of unlawful flight to avoid prosecution for fleeing for 18 years under false identities. During sentencing, the judge stated, Mr. Raleigh not only caused the deaths of 19 people through reckless and intentional route deviation, he assaulted 2 individuals before the crash, abandoned everyone, and lived anonymously for nearly 2 decades. The prolonged concealment is the strongest evidence he knew exactly what he had done. The court sentenced Calvin Raleigh to 42 years in federal prison with no parole or leniency. As Raleigh was led from the courtroom, many victims' relatives, now nearly 20 years older, broke down in tears. No one spoke. For them, justice was late, but it finally arrived. 1 week after the verdict, the Montana Cold Case Office held a formal meeting and signed the document. Cold Case File 1997 MMT-20 is closed after 18 years from the disappearance and 1 year after investigation restart. Final legal conclusion established. The mass disappearance case that had baffled Montana for nearly 2 decades was finally resolved with the truth. Raleigh was not a victim. He was the cause. The official file was closed, marking the end of one of the most complex cases in the Highwood Plains region. In the context of today's American society, where long-haul trucking, mining, and seasonal labor remain vital in many western and midwestern states, the story of Calvin Raleigh and the 1997 Montana disappearance offers profound lessons about professional responsibility, internal transparency, and the risks of abusing authority in harsh work environments. The case highlights a painful reality. A single irresponsible decision by a supervisor, such as Raleigh's deliberate disregard of the chief engineer's auxiliary brake and balance warning, can place an entire 20-person crew in catastrophe. In today's American professional life, especially in safety-critical fields, this reminds us that a culture of risk reporting must be absolutely prioritized and cannot depend on one individual, regardless of seniority or position. The story also raises issues of internal fraud and has cascading consequences. Raleigh manipulated ore delivery volumes, a form of small but ongoing white-collar crime, and this very conduct sparked the conflict with load inspectors Hartley and Laird, resulting in their pre-impact injuries. This reflects a reality in many American businesses. Fraud often doesn't stem from outright malice, but from overlooked gray areas, repeated small acts, and lack of oversight. When unchecked, they escalate into real danger. Raleigh's 18-year flight also reminds us of the value of personal accountability and professional ethics. Though he hid as Ellie Carter, lived as a drifter, and cut societal ties, the truth found him as technology from DNA to 3D simulation advanced. This is a reminder, in modern American society, where data is retained long-term and forensic technology grows ever more sophisticated, evading mistakes is never a sustainable solution. The lessons are clear: transparency, risk reporting, adherence to safety procedures, and facing consequences. These are not just professional principles, but the ethical foundation that keeps communities safe and connected. Thank you for following the entire journey of solving the 1997 Montana disappearance. If you found this story helpful and thought-provoking, please hit subscribe so you don't miss future cases. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring unsolved mysteries and real-life lessons from actual cases across America.